Tonight, we're exploring the untold origins of every legendary Pokémon. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine a world before the first sunrise, before the oceans carved their paths through the stone, and even before the concept of time had a second to tick. In the center of an infinite, silent void, a single egg appeared. This is where the story of every living thing begins. Not with a biological evolution, but with a cosmic awakening. We often look at legendary as powerful creatures to be caught and battled, but the ancient texts hidden within the libraries of Kanalav's city and the carvings on the walls of the Hoenn ruins tell a much different story. They tell us that these are not merely animals with extraordinary abilities. They are the literal architects of reality. They are the personifications of the very laws of physics that allow the Pokémon world to exist. When we talk about the origins of these beings, we are peeling back the layers of a divine history that spans billions of years. We are looking at a hierarchy of power that starts with a single consciousness and trickles down into the soil, the sea, and the very spirit of humanity. Why does the world have 3 distinct lakes in the Sinnoh region? Why do the winds of the Hoenn region carry the scent of an ancient, simmering war between the earth and the tide? Why is the history of the Unova region fractured by a literal split in truth and ideals? These aren't just flavor text entries in a Pokédex. They are the scars left behind by entities that existed before the first human ever took a breath. The stakes of understanding these origins are higher than they seem. To know where the legendaries come from is to understand the fragility, world itself. If Dialga represents time, then its birth wasn't just an event, it was the beginning of sequence. If Palkia represents space, its emergence was the birth of distance and volume. Without them, the world isn't just empty, it is impossible. We are dealing with beings that can unmake existence by simply drifting into a deep slumber or losing their temper. The myths suggest that the world today is actually a second or third draft, shaped by cataclysms and divine interventions that nearly wiped the slate clean. But there is a deep mystery at the heart of this lore. If these beings are so powerful, why do they allow themselves to be found? Why do they reside in deep caves, atop frozen peaks, or within the silent depths of the ocean, waiting for a worthy soul to encounter them? Is it a form of guardianship, or are they remnants of a golden age that has long since passed, leaving them as echoes of a power that the modern world can no longer fully comprehend? There are whispers of an original dragon that was once whole, a creature of such immense power that its mere presence defined a nation, only for it to be shattered by human conflict. There are tales of a life-giving tree and a cocoon of destruction that maintain the balance of entire continent waiting for the moment the cycle must reset. We often focus on the legendary Pokémon we can see, but the most profound mysteries lie in the ones that are hidden in the gaps of history. We hear of the burned tower in Johto and the 3 nameless Pokémon that perished in the flames, only to be resurrected as something entirely new, something divine. This suggests that the line between a normal Pokémon and a legendary one isn't just a matter of birthright, but sometimes a matter of tragedy and rebirth. It suggests that the gods of this world are deeply intertwined with the lives of the people who inhabit it, reacting to our wars, our kindness, and our curiosity. As we move through the history of the regions, from the snowy peaks of Sinnoh to the tropical islands of Alola and the cratered depths of Paldea, a pattern emerging. Each region is a chapter in a much larger book of Genesis. The creation of the land and sea wasn't a peaceful process. It was a violent, elemental struggle that required a mediator from the ozone layer to descend and bring peace. The light that bathes our world isn't just solar radiation. In some corners of the multiverse, it is a gift stolen from a dragon that travelled across dimensions. Tonight, we are going to piece this puzzle together. We are going to look past the stats and the movesets to find the soul of the myth. We will travel back to the moment the egg hatched in the void, follow the shaping of the continents, witness the rise and fall of ancient empires fueled by legendary power, and eventually reach the modern day where science and myth begin to blur in the depths of Area Zero. The journey is long, and the secrets are buried deep within the strata of time. Let us begin at the very beginning, in the silence of the primordial world, where the first heartbeat of the universe began to echo. Before there was anything, No time, no space, no matter, not even a whisper of light. There was only the void. And that void was not empty in the way we think of emptiness today. It was an absolute, infinite nothingness, so complete that the concepts of before and after, here and there, had no meaning. This was the primordial silence, a stillness so profound it could never be broken by sound. And yet, within that darkness, something stirred. Not a thought, not a force, but a potential. A seed of existence that had no name, no shape, and no awareness of itself. And from that seed, an egg formed. Not an egg as we know it, not made of shell and yolk, but an egg of pure possibility, woven from the fabric of what would one day become reality. For eons that did not pass, the egg floated in the void, a single point of concentration in an endless, silent sea of nothing. And then, at a moment that could never be measured, the egg cracked. From within emerged the first conscious being, the original one, the alpha and the omega of all that would ever exist. This being had no form at first, no fixed shape, because there were no laws of physics to constrain it. It simply was. And because it was conscious, it could will. And because it could will, it created. The being we now call Arceus looked out upon the blank canvas of the void and decided to paint a universe. In the myths passed down through the ancient peoples of Sinnoh, Arceus is described as having 1,000 arms, each one capable of reshaping reality. But those arms were not physical limbs. They were extensions of its will, the threads of creation itself. With these arms, Arceus wove the fabric of space-time, separated light from darkness, and gave birth to the dimensions that would house all future existence. It was the architect, the craftsman, the sole author of existence in its earliest moments. But even a god cannot create everything at once. The first task was to establish the foundations, time, space, and the realm beyond them, and so Arceus reached into its own essence and pulled free beings, each one a reflection of a fundamental aspect of the universe. But here we must pause and draw a careful line, because the story of Arceus and the egg in the void exists in two distinct spaces in the Pokémon world. One is the realm of mythic folklore, the sacred stories told by the ancient Celestica people and recorded in the Sinnoh region's oldest texts. The other is observable Pokémon history, the records and encounters that modern trainers and researchers can verify, and the two do not align perfectly. What we know for certain is that Arceus exists. It has been seen, documented, and even captured. Its power is beyond question. But the narrative of its birth from a cosmic egg in a silent void is not a scientific fact. It is a creation myth, believed by those who study the earliest legends, but not necessarily literal in every detail. The distinction matters because when we later discuss the creation trio, or the late guardians, or even Mew and its claims to ancestry, we will be moving between layers of truth. Some stories are cosmologies passed down through generations, shaped by human understanding and language. Others are grounded in direct observation and data. The egg in the void is the starting point, the foundation legend, the most sacred and most mysterious of them all. So let us sit with that image for a moment. The cosmic egg, floating in a silence that had never known a voice. And then the crack, the emergence, the first dawn of consciousness. That is the moment from which all Pokémon history flows. And yet, even as we accept that story as the beginning, we must ask, what became of the egg itself? In some tellings, the shell shattered and scattered across the newly forming universe, becoming the building blocks of dimension itself. In others, it dissolved back into the void, leaving only memory. But the most important question is this: what did Arceus do next? Once it had created the first three children of the cosmos. That is the story of the birth of dimensions, and it is a story that will take us into the very heart of what it means to exist. From the silent void, there is now a mind, a singular awareness that has no reference point, no memory of a before. The original one, Arceus, hovers in the absolute darkness, surrounded by nothing but its own potential. And in that stillness, it understands something profound. To create is to define, and to define requires limits. So Arceus begins to shape the forces that will become the architecture of all existence. It summons the first of its children, not from an egg, but from a thought so deep it becomes substance. Three beings emerge, each one a law of reality given form. The first is Dialga, a creature whose very presence distorts the flow of what will come to be called time. The second is Palkia, whose body pulses with the curvature of space. And the third is Giratina, a being of antimatter, the opposite of the world that is about to be built. Arceus does not simply command them, it entrusts them with the fundamental pillars of existence. Dialga is the first to act, and its action is a heartbeat. That single pulse echoes across the formless void, and suddenly there is a before and an after. The concept of linear time is born, a river that now flows in one direction, carving a path through the emptiness. Every successive beat of Dialga's heart marks another moment, another tick of a cosmic clock that will never be rewound. But time without a stage is meaningless, and that is where Palkia steps in. Palkia takes a breath, and that breath expands. The void begins to stretch, to curve, to take on dimensions. Width, height, depth, these become real. Space inflates like a bubble, pushing back the nothingness and creating room for matter to exist. Palkia's breath stabilizes the boundaries of three-dimensional space, holding firm the edges of reality so that something solid can eventually occupy it. With time and space now active, the universe has a skeleton. Yet even as this magnificent order takes shape, there is an immediate tension. Dialga and Palkia are not passive forces. They are living wills, and their energies push against each other. Time wants to move, space wants to hold still. The friction between them is raw, and without a balancing presence, the newborn cosmos risks tearing itself apart. Arceus recognizes this danger. The three creations are necessary, but they are also inherently unstable when left alone. Something must mediate, something must anchor the interplay of these vast powers, and so the Lake Trio is conceived, Mesprit and Azelf, not as rulers of time or space, but as the keepers of the emotional and mental forces that allow conscious beings to perceive and measure these laws. Knowledge, emotion, willpower. Without them, Dialga's clock would tick in a vacuum, and Palkia's space would be an empty stage with no audience. The three of them sink into the lakes of the future Sinnoh region, awaiting for the day when life will rise and need to understand its own existence. But even with this framework, the cosmos is not serene. The very act of creation generates a residue, a shadow of what is being built. Giratina, the third of the original three, embodies that shadow. Its nature is antimatter, the opposite of the universe that is expanding around it. Where Dialga and Palkia work in harmony, Giratina exists as a counterpoint, a necessary otherness. Yet its presence creates a friction that cannot be ignored. The balance is fragile, and Arceus must make a decision that will echo through all of legend. The tension between these forces is the heartbeat of the myth. Dialga and Palkia are not enemies, but their domains press against each other like two tectonic plates. Without Giratina to absorb the excess, reality might shatter, and so a cosmic balance is struck, one that relies on all three beings fulfilling their roles without overstepping. But even in those first moments, the potential for discord is already woven into the fabric of existence. The stage is set for a rift that will one day demand a banishment, a separation that will shape the very concept of a world apart from the one we know. With Dialga's first heartbeat still echoing across the newborn universe, time began to flow, a steady river of cause and effect, of past becoming present becoming future. But where there is order, there must also be chaos. Where there is matter, there must be something that opposes it. And so, from the same cosmic egg that gave rise to Arceus, a third entity stirred into being, not to govern time, not to shape space, but to embody the very force that resists both. This was Giratina, the Banished One, where Dialga pulsed with the rhythm of chronology, and Palkia resonated with the geometry of dimensions. Giratina represented something far more unsettling. It was the living embodiment of antimatter, the shadow counterpart to existence itself. In the grand structure of the universe, every particle of matter has a twin made of antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other, releasing pure energy. Giratina was the annihilation made conscious. It was entropy given form, the inexorable drift toward disorder that thermodynamics promised. While Dialga wound the clock of creation, Giratina was the force that sought to unwind it. At first, its presence within the fabric of reality was necessary, a balancing weight against the rigidity of absolute order. But Giratina's nature was not passive. It did not simply exist as a theoretical opposite. It acted. Its very essence was violent, a living storm of decay and dissolution. The dimensions that Dialga and Palkia had so carefully constructed began to buckle under the strain. Time warped, not from age, but from the corrosive touch of antimatter. Space splintered, not from expansion, but from the gnawing hunger of entropy. The universe, so newly born, teetered on the brink of collapse. Arceus watched. The original one had created these three to steward reality, but one of them was now threatening to unmake it. The violence was not malice, not in the way we understand it. Giratina simply was what it was, a force of undoing. Yet undoing could not be allowed to consume the fragile order that had only just begun. A judgment had to be passed, and so the divine decree was spoken. Arceus did not destroy Giratina, for even the original one understood that entropy could not be destroyed, only contained. Instead, Giratina was banished, torn from the dimensions it had helped define, cast out into a realm that existed alongside the normal world, but was separate from it. A place where the laws of time and space held no meaning, where cause and effect twisted into impossible loops, where up and down were suggestions rather than rules. This place would later be called the Distortion World. But here is the irony that echoes through every myth of judgment. The Distortion World was not simply a prison. It was a structural necessity. Imagine building a house of cards. Each card supports the next, but the whole structure also relies on the empty spaces between them. The Distortion World became that empty space, the negative pressure that held the positive shapes of the universe in place. Without it, the dimensions would not have stayed intact. The banishment was not just punishment. It was a recalibration of the cosmos. Giratina, exiled and raging, became the glue that kept reality from flying apart. Deep within that inverted realm, the Banished One waits. Not trapped in the way a caged animal is trapped, but anchored, bound to the very fabric that holds your world together. Every so often, legends whisper of its influence seeping through cracks in reality. A missing moment, a place that should not exist, a whisper of something older than time. Giratina is not gone. It is simply elsewhere, and while the foundations of the universe were now secure, something else was needed. Something to watch over the minds and hearts of the creatures who would one day inhabit the ordered dimensions. The creators of time and space were born. The Banished One was sealed, but the architects of the soul had not yet been summoned. That is where the next chapter of this creation myth begins, with three beings born not from force, but from feeling. With Giratina banished to the Distortion World, the universe had time, space, and a place for the unruly. But the cosmos was still raw, still unstable. The three embodiments of reality were volatile, their very natures prone to conflict. Dialga's endless forward march could grind everything to dust. Palkia's infinite expanse could tear apart the fabric of existence. And deep in its prison, Giratina fumed, a constant pressure against the seams of reality. Arceus knew that pure structure was not enough. The universe needed something more than laws. It needed meaning. So from a single spark of its own essence, Arceus created not a force of physics, but forces of consciousness. Three beings emerged, each a facet of the mind itself. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, the Lake Trio. They were not bound to dimensions or particles. They were the architects of the soul, imbued with the most fundamental metaphysical concepts: knowledge, emotion, and willpower. Uxie was given the gift of pure knowledge, an understanding of all that was, is, and could be. Mesprit embodied emotion, the spectrum of feeling that would give depth to existence. And Azelf represented willpower, the drive to act, to choose, to persist. Together, they formed the blueprint for consciousness itself. But their purpose was not merely philosophical. Arceus had foreseen a problem. The creation trio, Dialga, Palkia, and even the imprisoned Giratina, were beings of pure, untamed force. Their tempers could flare, their domains could clash. Without something to temper them, the universe might tear itself apart. The Lake Trio were given a sacred task. They were to act as the universe's emotional regulators, calming the violent impulses of the creation trio. Uxie would remind Dialga to pause and reflect. Mesprit would soothe Palkia's rage with empathy. Azelf would give Giratina the will to endure its exile without lashing out. They were not jailers, but guardians of balance, woven into the very spiritual fabric of reality. And here is where the story takes a profound turn. The Lake Trio were not only the keepers of the cosmic mind, they were also the bridge to something smaller, something fragile, something that had not yet been born: humanity. In the myths of Sinnoh, it is said that the Lake Trio's essence touched the primordial world, seeding consciousness into the creatures that would one day become human. Uxie gave them the ability to learn, to remember, to know. Mesprit gave them the capacity to feel, to love, to grieve. Azelf gave them the power to decide, to act, to shape their own destiny. The spark that created the Lake Trio became the spark of the human soul. They retreated to three lakes hidden across Sinnoh, their physical forms becoming guardians of the mind's most precious treasures. But their influence never left the world. Every time a human wanders, every time a human weeps, Every time a human stands firm in the face of despair, the Lake Trio are there. The architects of the soul ensured that the universe would not be cold and empty. They made it alive with meaning. And yet, for all their power, the Lake Trio were not the first beings to touch the world of the living. There was another, older presence, one that held within it the blueprint of every creature that would ever walk the land, swim the seas, or soar the skies. It is said that this being contained the very essence of all life, a genetic memory stretching back to the beginning. The next chapter of our journey leads us to that ancient ancestor, the one from whom all Pokémon may have descended. Prepare to meet the Ancestor of All. With the Lake Trio in place, the universe now had time, space, antimatter, and the very essence of knowledge, emotion, and willpower. Reality was structured, dimensions were stable, but the cosmos was still barren. There was no life, no movement beyond the raw forces and the silent drift of celestial bodies. And then, something entirely unexpected occurred. Amidst the quiet order of creation, a new being appeared, not through a deliberate act of will, not as part of Arceus's grand design, but seemingly on its own. This was Mew. The mysterious appearance of Mew marks one of the greatest puzzles in the mythology of the Pokémon world. Unlike the creation trio, who were shaped from the void by the original one, Mew simply emerged. Some ancient texts whisper that Mew was born from the echoes of the Lake Trio's first thoughts, a living spark of pure potential. Others suggest that Mew was always there, hiding in the folds of unformed matter, waiting for the universe to become complex enough to sustain it. But no matter which legend you lean toward, one fact remains undeniable. Mew carried inside it the blueprint for every future Pokémon species. Analysis of Mew's DNA reveals something breathtaking. Within that single, unassuming pink creature lies the genetic code of every Pokémon that would ever exist. It is as if Mew was a master template, a biological Rosetta Stone containing all possible forms, abilities, and adaptations. Every fin, feather, scale, and flame that would later appear across countless species was already present, compressed into Mew's elegant double helix. This discovery has sent researchers into centuries of debate. How could one being hold the genetic information for an entire kingdom of life? Was Mew designed that way, or did it evolve into that role? And that brings us to the heart of the debate. Is Mew a creation of Arceus or a parallel biological phenomenon? On one side, there are those who see Mew as Arceus's final gift, a seed of life meant to populate the empty worlds. In this view, Mew is the logical next step after the establishment of time and space. The Lake Trio gave the universe soul, Mew gave it body, but others argue that Mew is something far stranger, a spontaneous emergence, a biological accident that occurred when the raw energies of creation mixed with the newly formed dimensions. In this interpretation, Mew is not a creation but a coincidence, a beautiful, perfect coincidence that became the ancestor of all. What is certain is that Mew's adaptability allowed life to proliferate across the cooling planet. As the world solidified and oceans formed, Mew could change. It could shift its biology, learn new moves, and alter its form to suit any environment. This plasticity meant that Mew did not merely survive. It thrived, and in thriving it began to branch. Over eons, populations of Mew diverged, some specializing into the ancestors of what would become the first Pokémon species. The raw, unfiltered potential of Mew's DNA gradually became locked into stable patterns, yielding creatures adapted to the sea, the sky, the forest, the caves. And as those creatures multiplied, they carried fragments of Mew's original code forward, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting a single source. So Mew stands at the crossroads of myth and science, a being whose origin story is as much a mystery as the dawn of life itself. Was it a tool of the divine, or a fluke of cosmic biology? The truth may never be fully known, but Mew's legacy is undeniable. Without it, there would be no Pikachu, no Charizard, no Gyarados, none of the companions you know and love. In a very real sense, every Pokémon you have ever encountered is a distant descendant of that first, curious little creature, and yet the planet was still raw. Volcanic eruptions scarred the surface, continents shifted, and the atmosphere was thick with toxic gases. Life had a blueprint, but it needed a world that could support it. The next chapter of this story begins not with genetics or divine creation, but with the slow, violent sculpting of the Earth itself. A process that would soon be shaped by forces as ancient and powerful as the very first beings. Let us turn our attention now to the shaping of the Earth. With Mew's genetic blueprint now woven into the fabric of the world, life began to stir across the newly formed continents. But these early landmasses were not yet stable, nor were they complete. The planet was still a realm of raw, untamed forces, a crucible of fire and water, stone and vapor, waiting for its shaping. And so, deep within the molten core, where pressure and heat defied comprehension, two beings stirred. They were not born as simple creatures, but as embodiments of the planet's most fundamental elements. They were Groudon and Kyogre. Their arrival was not a gentle emergence. Within the planet's molten core, Groudon first opened its eyes, senses attuned to the churning magma, the slow drift of tectonic plates, the aching desire for expansion. It felt the weight of the seabed pressing down, and in that pressure it found purpose. Meanwhile, from the primordial seas, those vast, uncharted oceans that had gathered in the planet's low places, Kyogre arose. Its consciousness spread through every current, every drop of salt water, every storm brewing on the horizon. These two titans did not choose their conflict. They were born into it, their very existence defined by the domains they commanded. Groudon's role was to raise the land. With each step across the ocean floor, it pulled the tectonic plates upward, forcing continents to rise from the depths. Mountains breached the surface, jagged and raw, while valleys cracked open to receive the rivers yet to come. The crust groaned under Groudon's power, but it obeyed. The land masses expanded, pushing against the waters, claiming new territory for the world to hold. And as the continents grew, so too did Groudon's sense of dominion. But Kyogre would not be outdone. The seas had been here longer than the land. They were the first true expression of the planet's substance. Kyogre commanded the rains, not merely as weather, but as a direct extension of its will. It summoned clouds that darkened the sky, then released torrents that filled every basin, every trench, every depression in the earth. The oceans swelled, drowning the newly risen land, eroding the coastlines, and reclaiming territory Groudon had only just built. Where Groudon pushed up, Kyogre pushed back. Their domains overlapped inevitably. The boundary between land and sea became a battlefield. Tectonic shifts triggered massive tsunamis. Volcanic eruptions sent plumes of ash into the atmosphere, only to be washed away by endless storms. The planet itself seemed to fracture and reform in a relentless cycle of creation and destruction. Groudon and Kyogre clashed not out of malice, but because their very natures demanded it. The earth could not be shaped without this conflict. Every mountain range, every abyssal trench, every coastline was a scar from their primordial war. And yet this war could not last forever. The world needed balance. Above the clouds, beyond the storms, a third presence watched, not yet ready to intervene, but aware that the time would come. The conflict between the two titans was only the beginning. Up next in Chapter 7, we turn to the sky's mediator, the one who would bring an end to the chaos, and in doing so, define the fate of the planet for all ages to come. Chapter 7. The sky's mediator, so the world had been shaped. The molten core had cooled into stable plates, and Groudon had walked the young crust, expanding land upwards and outwards. Kyogre had filled the basins with water, carving the first oceans. For a time, there was balance. But balance between two forces that define creation is never static. It is a tension, a pressure that builds and builds until something has to give. And what gave, what broke, was the very atmosphere itself. Groudon and Kyogre were not passive architects. They were living embodiments of their elements. Groudon was the land, the magma beneath the surface, the solid certainty of earth. Kyogre was the sea, the deep currents, the endless rain. And as their territories grew, so did their hunger for expansion. The land wanted more crust, more continents. The sea wanted more water, more depths. They began to clash. Not in the way of two beasts locking horns, but as planetary forces colliding. Their conflict did not happen in a single battle. It was an escalation over eons. Every time Groudon raised a mountain range, Kyogre sent a tsunami to erode it. Every time Kyogre deepened a trench, Groudon pulled magma from the mantle to fill it. The planet groaned under this constant war, and then the weather itself became a weapon. When Groudon exerted its full power, the continents pulsed with volcanic heat, the air turned dry and dusty, and a relentless sun baked the land until the seas themselves began to shrink. When Kyogre answered, it summoned clouds that darkened the entire sky. Torrential rains fell for years without stopping. Oceans rose and swallowed entire land masses. The temperature swung between scorching drought and suffocating flood. The young world, still trying to find its equilibrium, was being torn apart by its own creators. This was not a simple territorial dispute. This was a catastrophic weather war that threatened to reset the planet's biosphere. If either side had won, the world would have become a single desiccated desert or a lifeless, sunless ocean. Life had barely begun to stir in the shallows and on the new continents, but it would have been erased. The entire biological experiment of Pokémon evolution would have ended before it truly began, and so the planet needed a mediator, not a diplomat, not a god of compromise. It needed a force that existed above the conflict, literally and figuratively, up in the stratosphere, where the air thinned into the deepest blue. A being had been watching. It had drifted in the upper atmosphere since the very formation of the world. Invisible to the surface dwellers below, it did not care for the land or the sea. Its domain was the sky itself, layer of gas and ozone that wrapped the planet like a second skin. Its name was Rayquaza. Rayquaza's descent from the ozone layer to quell the primal rage of the land and sea was not a battle. It was an intervention of pure authority. The sky serpent descended through the storm clouds, its body longer than any mountain range, its scales gleaming like meteorite iron. It did not attack Groudon or Kyogre. Instead, it positioned itself between them, its presence a declaration that the atmosphere belonged to no one. And then it let out a cry that resonated through the planet's core. That sound was not anger, it was a command. The command of a being so ancient and so powerful that even the embodiments of land and sea had no choice but to stop. The torrential rains ceased. The volcanic eruptions cooled. The world held its breath. The conflict did not end because one side defeated the other. It ended because a third force, the sky, imposed a truce. The weather trio was born in that moment. Groudon of the land, Kyogre of the sea, and Rayquaza of the sky. But a truce between primal forces cannot last forever. Their nature is to expand, to consume, to dominate. So the resolution was not permanent peace. It was a cycle. Groudon and Kyogre, having exhausted themselves in the struggle, would retreat into deep slumber. Groudon would sink into the magma chambers beneath the continents. Kyogre would descend into the darkest trenches of the ocean floor, and Rayquaza would return to the ozone layer, where it would feed on atmospheric particles and keep watch. For centuries, for millennia, they would sleep, but every so often, something would wake them. A shift in tectonic plates, a warming of ocean currents, the actions of a human or a Pokémon that disturbed the ancient balance, and then the war would begin again. The cycle of their long slumber and periodic awakening became the hidden heartbeat of the planet. Now, if you look at the geography of the Hoenn region, you can see the scars of this elemental stalemate. The region was physically forged through this endless contest between fire and water. The jagged coastline, the volcanic peak of Mount Chimney, the sprawling sea routes between islands, the deep trench of the Sutaplis caldera. Every landmark tells the story of a push and pull that never fully resolved. The land is not stable there. It is a patchwork of eruptions and floods, of new islands formed and old ones drowned. Hoenn exists as a testament to conflict. It is a region built on the boundary between two worlds, and Rayquaza is still circles high above, watching. When Groudon and Kyogre stir from their slumber, it descends once more. It does not destroy them. It does not need to. It simply reminds them who rules the sky. But there are other forces, older than even the weather trio, that lie dormant beneath the surface of Hoenn. Forces that have nothing to do with the war of elements, but with the foundation of the earth itself. Ancient mechanisms buried in rock and ice, guardians that predate the sky's mediation, and one of them, sealed away for reasons lost to time, is about to wake. After the primal rage of land and sea had been quelled by Rayquaza's descent, the world was left scarred but stabilized. The continents rose from the churning oceans, yet they remained scattered, drifting as if unsure of their final shape. It was in this chaotic aftermath that another ancient force stirred, one whose purpose was not to destroy or to create from nothing, but to arrange, to pull the jagged fragments of the world into the positions we now recognize as the map of the Pokémon world. That force is Regigigas, the colossal Pokémon. The legends say Regigigas pulled the continents into their current positions, using ropes of immense power. Imagine that for a moment. Massive cords of pure energy, perhaps woven from the same fabric as the Earth itself, lassoing whole landmasses and dragging them across the primordial seas. Each tug reshaped coastlines, raised mountain ranges, and carved out the basins of future oceans. It was a feat of raw physical might that dwarfs anything we have seen from Groudon's continental upheaval or Kyogre's deluge. Regigigas did not simply raise land, it rearranged the world, piece by piece, until the map looked right. But such labour was not accomplished alone. Regigigas, despite its titanic strength, required helpers to stabilise the new geography and to watch over the different eras that would define human civilization. And so, from the raw earth materials of the planet, Regigigas created 3 golems: Regirock, carved from living stone; Regis, forged from ancient permafrost; and Registeel, moulded from purified metal. These were not mere statues. They were animated by a spark of Regigigas' own will. Autonomous guardians designed to serve a purpose far beyond simple construction. They were the Regi golems, each one a living artifact. Why would such a powerful being need these golems? Because Regigigas understood that the world it had shaped would soon be inhabited by creatures, including humans, who would grow in knowledge and ambition. The golems were intended as protectors, but also as keepers of thresholds. Regirock, Regis, and Registeel came to represent distinct stages in human technological development: the Stone Age, the Ice Age, and the Iron Age. Each golem guarded a specific era, ensuring that humanity did not advance too quickly or misuse the knowledge it gained. They were silent sentinels, standing watch over the slow march of progress. But the humans who encountered Regigigas directly did not see a benevolent world-shaping deity. They saw a being of such overwhelming power that it could crack the earth and drag continents. They feared what they could not control, and so, in an act that reveals much about ancient humanity, they worked together to seal Regigigas away, deep beneath the frozen tundra of what would one day be known as Snowpoint Temple. They constructed a prison of ice and rock and prayer. They locked the colossal Pokémon inside, hoping that by hiding it, they could forget the terror of its existence. They were wrong, of course. Sealing a force of nature does not erase it. It only postpones the reckoning. Regigigas slumbers still, its ropes of power coiled around the pillars that hold the continents in place. Its golems remain scattered across the world, dormant, but awaiting the day their master calls them again. And when that day comes, the earth will once again be pulled and pushed into a new shape, for the world is never truly finished being shaped. Before we move deeper into the next chapter of myth, there is another tale that rises from the ashes of ancient destruction, a tale of fire and lightning, of a phoenix that gave life to 3 beasts, and of a storm that swept through the heart of a kingdom. The phoenix and the storm are waiting, and their story will set the stage for an age of heroes and legends. The Titan Regigigas had finished its work, and the continents now sat where they would for eons to come. As the landmasses settled and the great glaciers receded, a new world emerged from the primordial chaos. But Regigigas was not alone in its shaping of the earth. In the aftermath of the land's pulling, something else began to grow. Something that would become the cradle of one of the most enduring legends in all of Pokémon history. This was the region later known as Johto, a land of misty forests, ancient mountains, and skies that seemed to hold secrets far older than the mountains themselves. In the heart of Johto, where the hills rolled gently and the rivers cut silver ribbons through the forest, a city would rise. Its name would one day be Ecruteak, though in those early days it was little more than a gathering of huts and a single sacred clearing. The people who settled here were not like the others. They did not carve their homes into the sides of volcanoes or build their cities on the backs of migrating Pokémon. Instead, they looked up. They watched the clouds, the birds, and the great storms that rolled in from the sea, and they listened. It was here, in that quiet valley, that the first twin towers were raised. The architects of Ecruteak were guided by something more than wood and stone. They built two structures, side by side, as if pulling a single idea into two separate forms. The first was the brass tower, its copper-coloured spire reaching toward the heavens like a challenge to the sun. The second was the tin tower, its silver-grey sheen catching the moonlight in a softer, more reflective glow. Together, they stood as a testament to a belief that had taken root in the hearts of the Johto people. The belief that the world above and the world below were not separate, but two valves of a single, breathing whole. That belief had a name. Two names, in fact. The people of Ecruteak spoke of Ho-Oh, the great phoenix whose wings could paint the sky in 7 colours, and Lugia, the deep sea guardian whose presence kept the storms of the ocean in balance. Ho-Oh was the guardian of the skies, the keeper of the rainbow, the fire that could grant rebirth. Lugia was the guardian of the depths, the tempest of the abyss, the calm that lay beneath the waves. Together, they were the twin pillars of the Johto faith. The brass tower was raised in honour of Ho-Oh, a beacon for the light of the sun. The tin tower was raised in honour of Lugia, a mirror for the light of the moon. But the relationship between these avian deities and the people of Johto was not one of distant awe alone. The early settlers believed that Ho-Oh and Lugia were not merely watchers from afar. They were partners in the delicate dance of life. When Ho-Oh descended to perch atop the brass tower, its feathers would catch the morning light and scatter it across the valley, bringing warmth and growth. When Lugia rose from the deep sea to circle the tin tower, its song would calm the raging winds and quiet the tempests that threatened the coast. The people did not worship out of fear, they celebrated out of gratitude. They held festivals when the rainbow appeared, and they lit lanterns along the shore when the sea was still. This bond between people and Pokémon was not unique in the ancient world, but it was rare in its intimacy. The Johto people built their lives around the rhythm of Ho-Oh's flight and Lugia's return. They planted crops according to the colours of the sky. They navigated the ocean by the direction of the storms. They did not see these legendary beings as gods to be placated, but as elders to be honoured. And for centuries, the peace held. The brass tower and the tin tower stood side by side, symbols of a duality that did not tear the world apart, but held it together. Light and shadow, sky and sea, fire and rain. The Johto people understood that each needed the other to exist. Ho-Oh could not shine forever without the return of the night. Lugia could not calm every storm without the occasional flash of lightning. The Guardians themselves seemed to understand this balance. They never met in conflict. They never challenged each other's domain. The skies were Ho-Oh's and the deep seas were Lugia's, and the land between was the province of those who looked to both. And yet, even the most perfect harmony can be broken by a single spark. For centuries, the towers had stood as monuments to trust and cooperation, but the people of Ecruteak were not immune to pride, nor to the slow drift of memory. The generations that had built the towers knew exactly why they had placed Ho-Oh's perch atop the brass tower and Lugia's altar within the tin tower. But as the decades turned to centuries, the meaning began to blur. The rituals became habits, the faith became tradition, and tradition, when its roots are no longer watered and become brittle. It was in this quiet forgetting that the great fire of the brass tower was born. The details of that night are shrouded in ash and regret, but the consequences were clear. The brass tower, the tower of Ho-Oh, burned. The flames consumed its spire, melted its copper sheathing, and turned its proud silhouette into a blackened skeleton against the stars. The people watched in horror, but it was too late. The balance had been broken, and in the aftermath, something would emerge that would change the fate of Johto forever. That story, however, belongs to the tragedy that followed. The tragedy of the burned tower, where death gave way to rebirth, and where 3 lives were transformed into legend. The twin towers of Ecruteak once stood as monuments to the bond between heaven and earth, between the storm and the sun, but a single bolt of lightning changed everything. It struck the eastern tower, the brass tower, on a night that would be remembered for centuries. That strike did not merely scar the stone. It ignited a fire that would burn for 3 days. You have to understand the scale of this blaze. The brass tower was built from ancient timber and metal, a structure that gleamed like polished gold in the daylight. But fire does not discriminate. It climbed the walls, devoured the beams, and turned the proud spire into a furnace. The people of Ecruteak could do nothing. They watched from a distance as the flames roared, as the heat warped the air into a shimmering haze, and as the tower groaned and began to collapse in on itself, and trapped inside were 3 Pokémon. We do not know their names. The old records do not preserve them. Perhaps they were ordinary Pokémon taking shelter. Perhaps they were guardians of the tower itself, unwilling to abandon their post. But when the ceiling fell and the floors gave way, they were swallowed by the inferno. Their cries were lost in the crackling of the fire. And by the time the embers cooled, the brass tower was a blackened skeleton, and those 3 lives were gone. This is where the story shifts from tragedy to miracle, because Ho-Oh, the phoenix who had once roosted atop the tower, returned. It descended through the smoke and the ash, its feathers shedding a light that seemed to push back the darkness of grief, and with a power that no mortal could fully explain, it brought those 3 fallen Pokémon back, not as they were but remade, transformed, reborn. The lightning that had struck the tower became the essence of Raikou, a beast of thunder whose fur crackled with the energy of that first fateful bolt. The fire that had consumed the tower became the core of Entei, a lion whose mane burned with the relentless heat of those 3 days, and the rain that had finally quenched the flames. The rain that fell when the fire was at its worst, carried on a wind from the sea, became the spirit of Suicune, a creature of auroral grace whose very presence seemed to cleanse the air. Thus the legendary beasts were born. They are not separate legends. They are the same story, told in 3 forms. Raikou is the memory of the strike, Entei is the memory of the blaze, and Suicune is the memory of the rain that came too late but still came. They are the tower's last echo, given flesh and purpose, and they vanished into the world, roaming ever since, never staying in one place for long. Some say they still return to the burned tower's ruins on certain nights, if you know where to look. But the tower itself remains empty, a hollow monument to a day when lightning changed everything. Now, as the Johto region slowly rebuilt, another chapter of myth was unfolding far across the ocean. A different tower, a different dragon, and a conflict that would split a single being into 3 parts. That is a story of truth and ideals, of a sword and a shield, and of a king who forgot what it meant to listen. But we will leave that for another night. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The lightning that struck the brass tower did not just ignite a fire. It set into motion a chain of events that would echo across generations, transforming 3 lost souls into immortal guardians. But while Johto mourned and rebuilt, far to the west, in a land that would one day be called Unova, a different kind of storm was brewing, one born not from the sky, but from the hearts of men. Here the oldest records speak of a time when the region was not yet divided into cities and routes. It was a land of vast open plains and ancient forests, where the only law was the unyielding power of nature. And in those days, 2 brothers arose, leaders of a fledgling civilization, that dreamed of something greater. They sought to build a new world of harmony, a society where people could live in peace and prosperity, free from the chaos of the wild. Their vision was pure, their purpose united. To aid them in this monumental task, they found an ally unlike any other. A single powerful dragon whose form was said to be the embodiment of raw, unshaped creation. This dragon was not merely a beast of fire or lightning. It was a being of pure energy, a living nexus of force and will. It served both brothers without question, its power amplifying their ambitions, its presence a beacon of hope for the people. For a time, harmony reigned. The brothers built a great city, a center of learning and industry, and the dragon stood at its heart, a silent guardian. But harmony is fragile, and the minds of men are never still. As the brothers grew older, their visions of the perfect world began to diverge. One brother came to believe that the foundation of any lasting society must be absolute truth, a world built on facts, evidence, and the unyielding reality of the past. To him, only by confronting what is real could humanity truly progress. The other brother embraced a different path, one of ideals, a world shaped not by what is, but by what could be, driven by the passion of dreams and the courage to imagine a better future. Both were sincere. Both were convinced of their righteousness, and neither could accept the other's perspective. The dragon, which had been the vessel of their shared ambition, now became the mirror of their conflict. Its body began to tremble, its energy fluctuating as the two opposing forces within it, truth and ideals, clashed for dominance. The brothers, once inseparable, now stood on opposite sides of a chasm that widened with every argument. The internal conflict between truth and ideals did not simply create a rift between them. It tore the dragon asunder from within. In a cataclysm that shook the very foundations of the land, the dragon split into three separate beings. From the flames of its divided heart, two powerful dragons emerged. Reshiram, the embodiment of truth, whose flames burned with the intensity of reality itself, and Zekrom, the embodiment of ideals, whose lightning crackled with the electric energy of unfulfilled potential. Each dragon chose a brother. Reshiram soaring to the side of the brother who championed truth, and Zekrom descending to the one who clung to ideals. And where the original dragon had once stood, a hollow shell remained, a frozen, empty husk devoid of purpose or power. This third being was Kuram, a creature born of the void left behind when the two halves were torn apart. Kuram drifted into the remote reaches of Unova, settling in a cavern of eternal ice. It was neither truth nor ideals, but the cold absence of both, a reminder that when grand visions fracture, something precious is lost forever. The city that the brothers had built fell into decline, its people scattered, and the legend of the original dragon faded into myth. But the echoes of that split never truly vanished, and so the question endures. What happens to a world that loses its original harmony? The answer lies not in the past, but in the remnants of that broken dragon, and in the choices yet to be made, because the fractured truth of what was lost, and what might still be reclaimed, is a story that is far from over. The legend of the single dragon that served both brothers left us at a precipice. The two princes of Unova, once united in their vision for a world of harmony, had begun to see that world through different lenses. One brother believed that the path to a perfect society was paved with truth, the unflinching reality of the world, the way things actually are, without illusion or wishful thinking. The other brother clung to ideals, the belief that the world could be remade, that a higher goal was worth striving for, even if it meant reshaping reality itself. For a time, the original dragon had accommodated both. It was a being of immense power, its form a fusion of two opposing forces held in perfect balance. But that balance could not last. As the brothers' arguments grew sharper, more entrenched, the fault line between truth and ideals deepened, and the dragon, that magnificent creature that had helped them build their kingdom, began to feel the strain of serving two masters who now wanted entirely different things. The breaking point came when the brothers could no longer reconcile. Their disagreement was no longer a philosophical debate over dinner. It became a war, a conflict that would tear apart not just their family, but the entire Unova region. Armies were raised, cities burned, and the land itself was scarred by battles that raged day and night. And at the heart of that war stood the brothers and their dragon. But the dragon could no longer remain whole. It was being pulled apart from within, its essence splitting along the fracture line of the brothers' wills. In a cataclysmic event, the original dragon shattered. From its broken body emerged two new beings, Reshiram, the vessel of truth, and Zekrom, the vessel of ideals. The devastating war between the twin princes that laid waste to the Unova region was not just a war of armies and land. It was the literal fracturing of the mythic dragon that had once been their shared power. This war did not end with the appearance of Reshiram and Zekrom. In fact, it intensified. Each brother now commanded a being that reflected his own absolute conviction. A creature of fire and lightning that would respond only to the purity of the belief it embodied. There was no more compromise, no more shared dragon to mediate their differences. The brothers faced each other one last time, and the clash between truth and ideals reached its final, devastating crescendo. When the dust settled, both dragons had been pushed beyond their limits. They did not die, but they could no longer remain in the world, living in the same way. Reshiram and Zekrom transformed into dragon stones after the conflict, objects of coiled power that lay dormant, waiting for a new soul worthy of awakening them. The stones held the dragons in a slumber that would last for millennia, preserving the essence of truth and ideals until a time when they might be called upon again. But there is a third piece to this story. When the original dragon split, it did not produce only two fragments. A third piece was torn away, a hollow shell, a body left behind with no heart, no will, no purpose. That shell became Kurum. While Reshiram and Zekrom became the embodiments of powerful forces, Kuvurum was the void that remained, the absence of both truth and ideals. Left incomplete, it retreated to the farthest corner of Unova, a place known as the Giant Chasm, a frozen canyon where it could exist in isolation. Kurum's lonely existence in the Giant Chasm, waiting for its missing halves, is one of the most tragic legends in Pokémon mythology. It is a creature of pure emptiness, yearning to be whole again, but unable to reach the parts of itself that were torn away. In some ancient writings, it is said that Kurum was never meant to exist at all. It is merely the leftover, the debris of a catastrophe, forever seeking the reunion that would end its suffering. The philosophical weight of the Tao trio, Reshiram, Zekrom and Kurum, is immense. These three dragons are not just ancient beasts of myth, they are a lesson etched into the fabric of the Pokémon world. Why neither truth nor ideals can exist alone. The original dragon was powerful because it held both sides in balance. Without truth, ideals become hollow fantasies. Without ideals, truth becomes cold and lifeless. The brothers failed because they each chose only one path, and in doing so, they condemned their dragon to an eternity of fragmentation. Unova itself bears the scars of that lesson. A region that once thrived under a unified vision, now a land marked by division and waiting for reconciliation. Yet the story does not end with the Tao trio. The war in Unova was just one of many ancient conflicts that reshaped the world. Across the ocean, in a region far to the west, another war was brewing. A war that would involve not just two brothers and a dragon, but an entire kingdom, a desperate king, and a weapon of unimaginable destruction. That chapter is known as the Kalos War and the Ultimate Weapon, and it holds secrets about life, death, and the lengths to which one man will go to undo the greatest tragedy of his life. The war in Unova had ended, but its echoes did not fade into silence. They rippled outward, across oceans and continents, whispering to other lands, other kingdom, other rulers, who would hear the lesson of the twin princes and choose a different path, or perhaps the same path dressed in new robes. For 3,000 years ago, in the region we now call Kalos, a king rose to power who would not let a war end with a treaty or a monument. He would end it with a weapon. His name was Azed, and his reign began in an age when the boundaries between Pokémon and humanity were thinner, more intimate. He ruled not from a distant throne, but from the heart of a kingdom that valued beauty, life and the bond between trainer and partner, and at his side always was a Floette. Not just any Floette, but one that had been with him since childhood. A constant companion whose presence softened the weight of the crown. Their connection was legendary in its own right. A friendship so deep that it seemed woven into the fabric of the Kalosian earth. But legends are rarely gentle. A bloody regional war descended upon Kalos, a conflict that consumed villages, fields and forests, turning the lush landscapes into graveyards. King Azed, beloved by his people, watched his kingdom bleed. He ordered his armies to fight, to hold the line, but the war ground on, year after year, until the rivers ran the colour of rust. And in the chaos, in one of those senseless skirmishes that wars produce like weeds, Azed's Floette was struck down. She died in his arms, a silent bloom of petals and stillness. The king did not weep, he did not rage. Instead, a quiet madness took root deep in his chest, a desperation so vast that it hollowed him out. He could not bring her back. He could not undo the war. But he could build something that would ensure no one else ever had to feel this particular, crushing emptiness, or so he told himself. In that grief-soaked resolve, AZ conceived a machine that would redefine the world's understanding of power and sacrifice. It was called the Ultimate Weapon, and it required a fuel that only the living could provide. AZ ordered his scientists and engineers to construct a device unlike anything ever imagined. A cannon that could channel the life force of Pokémon into a single devastating blast. The kingdom's philosophers debated the morality of such a thing. But the king's word was absolute. Pokémon were gathered, perhaps willingly, perhaps not. The records are blurred by time and terror, and their essence was extracted, siphoned into stone chambers and crystalline conduits. Thousands of lives, reduced to concentrated energy, waiting to be unleashed. The war would end. The enemy would be erased. And somewhere in the machinery's cold heart, as they hoped that the same force could rewrite the laws of death itself, the weapon was fired. The light that engulfed Kalos that day was seen from distant shores, a pillar of white that climbed into the stratosphere and then collapsed outward in a shockwave of pure elemental finality. The opposing armies vanished. The war stopped instantly, absolutely. Peace fell over the land like a shroud. But Aziz's Floette did not return. The weapon had not been designed for resurrection, only for annihilation. And in the moment of its firing, the machine did something unintended. It touched the king with its own terrible energy. Azed became immortal. Not blessed, not honoured, but cursed to walk the earth for millennia. His body never aging, his grief never healing. He would watch his kingdom crumble, his name forgotten, while the echoes of that single desperate act haunted every corner of the world he had tried to save. The ultimate weapon was dismantled, its core sealed away, but its scar never faded, and the Pokémon whose lives had been fed into that furnace. Their energy did not simply dissipate. It settled into the soil, the stones, the very air of Kalos, awaiting a time when it might be called upon again. The war was over, but the story was far from finished. What rose from that ashes of that ancient atrocity were forces older than the king himself. Forces that had watched from the edges of existence, patient and terrible. They would not let such a crime go unanswered, and their names would become the next chapter in this long, tangled tapestry. For in the wake of the ultimate weapon, the cycle of life and death itself would awaken, demanding balance. And that is exactly what we will explore in Chapter 14. The cycle of life and death. The weapon had been fired. King AZ's terrible machine had drawn upon the life force of countless Pokémon, channeling their energy into a blast that ended the war in an instant. But the cost was beyond measure. Not only the thousands of souls consumed to power it, but the deeper wound it left upon the land itself. For in that single catastrophic release, something stirred beneath the earth of Kalos. Two forces, ancient and patient, began to respond to the imbalance the ultimate weapon had created. These were not beings born from the weapon, nor were they summoned by any human hand. They had always been there, woven into the very fabric of the region, acting as the quiet regulators of life and death. Their names are known to us now as Xerneas and Yveltal, and their emergence marked the beginning of a new chapter in Kalos' history. A chapter written not in stone or steel, but in the ebb and flow of every living creature's existence. Xerneas is the embodiment of life itself. In its natural state, it takes the form of a great stag, its antlers shimmering with a radiance that seems to hold the colours of every forest, every meadow, every bloom that has ever graced the world. According to the oldest myths of Kalos, Xerneas has the power to share eternal life. When it chooses, it can bestow a gift of endless vitality upon those it deems worthy. But this is not a simple act of generosity. It is a deliberate redistribution of life energy across the ecosystem. Xerneas does not create life from nothing. It draws from the deep wells of the world's vitality and channels it where it is needed most. The forests where it walks grow impossibly lush. The animals that cross its path age more slowly, and those rare individuals who have been granted a portion of its eternal life are said to live for centuries, their bodies untouched by decay, their spirits bound to the land itself. But life cannot exist without its opposite. Where Xerneas gives, Yveltal takes. This Pokémon appears as a massive dark avian creature, its wings like tattered shadows, its eyes burning with a cold, knowing light. Yveltal does not simply cause death, it absorbs life energy. When it spreads its wings, it draws the vitality from everything around it. Plants wilt, animals collapse, and even the air grows thin and still. Its touch is a gentle extinguishing, as natural as the falling of autumn leaves. And yet Yveltal is not evil. In the cycle of Kalos, death is not an enemy, but a necessary partner to life. The energy that Yveltal absorbs is not destroyed. It is stored, returned to the earth in a form that can later be released to nourish new growth. In this way, Yveltal is the great recycler, the one who ensures that no life force is ever truly lost. The balance between these two beings is delicate and absolute. If Xerneas were to give too freely, the world would become overcrowded, stagnant, unable to renew itself. If Yveltal were to take too much, the land would fall into a perpetual winter of silence and decay. Together, they maintain the pulse of Kalos, each one's power checked by the other's presence. But they are not alone in this task, for beneath the surface of the region, woven into the very soil and stone, there is a third force that acts as the ecosystem's immune system. This is Zygarde. Unlike Xerneas and Yveltal, Zygarde does not exist as a single unified being. Instead, it is composed of countless individual cells, each one no larger than a pebble, scattered across the land. These cells lie dormant in the earth, in the roots of trees, in the cracks of mountains, waiting. When the balance of life and death is threatened, when an unnatural surge of energy overwhelms the region, or when a force like the ultimate weapon disrupts the natural order, the cells begin to stir. They move through the ground, drawn together by an instinct far older than any human civilization. They coalesce, they form a body, and when enough cells have gathered, Zygarde awakens in its true form, a massive serpent of black and green, with patterns that glow like veins of emerald energy. Zygarde's purpose is not to choose between life and death. It is not a judge of right or wrong. It is a regulator, programmed to restore equilibrium by eliminating whatever threatens the cycle. If Xerneas and Yveltal become unbalanced, Zygarde intervenes. If a human weapon like the ultimate weapon leaves a wound in the world, Zygarde cells will seep into that wound, slowly sealing it, neutralizing the unnatural energy. It is a being of pure homeostasis, and its awakening is always a sign that something has gone terribly wrong. In the wake of the Kalos War, the cells began to move. The ultimate weapon's blast had drawn a surplus of life energy from the region and then released it in a concentrated wave, creating a pocket of imbalance that could not be ignored. Xerneas and Yveltal rose in response, their ancient instincts triggered by the wound. Xerneas would begin to spread eternal life across the land, trying to replenish what had been taken. Yveltal would absorb the excess that remained, the chaotic energy that threatened to spiral out of control. And far below, Zygarde's cells started their slow, deliberate march toward the epicenter of the disturbance. The people of Kalos, already reeling from the war, witnessed these events with a mixture of awe and terror. They did not understand what they were seeing. To them, the appearance of a radiant stag and a shadowy bird was a sign from the heavens, a judgment upon their sins. They built shrines and temples to honor these beings, but they also built walls, barriers meant to contain the unknown. They called the cycle of life and death the Great Cocoon, a name that captured the sense of a world wrapped in a fragile shell, always at risk of being consumed by the darkness within. But the Great Cocoon was not a prison. It was a metaphor for the delicate balance that holds all of Kalos together. If the cycle were ever to break, if Xerneas and Yveltal were to fall into conflict, or if Zygarde were to fail in its duty, the cocoon would unravel. The life energy of the world would either drain away entirely, leaving a dead husk, or it would swell beyond control, drowning everything in endless, formless vitality. The ancient myths warned of this fate. A world without death, where nothing could end and nothing could begin again. A world without birth, where the silence of the grave stretched across every horizon. So the three beings settled into their roles, each one a thread in the same tapestry. Xerneas roamed the forests, bestowing its gift in measured doses. Yveltal slept in hidden caves, its presence a quiet reminder of the end that awaits all things. And Zygarde lay beneath the earth, its cells whispering to one another, ever watchful. For 3,000 years, the balance held. But the story does not end here. In another part of the world, far from the forests of Kalos, an archipelago of sun-drenched islands held a mystery of its own. A light that had been stolen, a guardian that had fallen into darkness, and a legend that would challenge everything we think we know about the boundaries between worlds. That story begins when a great shining creature descended from the heavens, bringing not destruction, but a promise of warmth and illumination. It is a story that will lead us to the very edge of what it means to be a legendary Pokémon, and it is called the Light of Alola. The previous chapter closed with the tale of Xerneas and Yveltal, the twin titans of life and death, who rose from the ashes of Kalos' ultimate weapon. But while that story was drenched in sorrow and rebirth, there is another legend, far away in a sun-drenched archipelago, that begins not with grief, but with a blinding light, a light that arrived from somewhere else entirely. Long before the first settlers paddled their wooden canoes to the shores of what we now call Ala, there existed a creature of pure radiance. Its true name has been lost to time, but the ancient islanders knew it simply as the Blinding One. They spoke of it in hushed tones, describing a being that did not walk or fly, but simply shun. It came from a different dimension, a realm of twisting, crystalline space we now call ultraspace, and it came with a purpose, or perhaps just a nature, to share its light. You see, the Blinding One was not a creature of darkness. It was a source of illumination, a living star that pulsed with raw, luminous energy. When it first emerged into Alola's ancient sky, the islands were bathed in a brilliance so intense that the shadows themselves seemed to retreat. The early Alolans looked up in wonder. They did not fear this visitor. They celebrated it. They built their first songs around its glow, and they called that glow the Light of Alola. But here is where the story takes a tragic turn. The Blinding One did not simply shine and depart. It gave of itself. It poured its own radiance into the land, into the waters, into the very stones of the islands. It wanted to share, perhaps because sharing was its only way of existing. But that act of generosity came at a terrible price. Over time, the beings of Alola, some of them powerful guardians in their own right, began to take that light for granted. They grew greedy. They wanted to keep the Blinding One's power for themselves. And so, in a moment of collective hunger, they stripped the light away. The Blinding One did not fight back. It could not. It was a creature of giving, not of taking. When its light was taken by force, it collapsed into a state of desperation. It became a hollow shell, a dark, jagged form that we now know as Necrozma. The name means something in the old tongue, the one who consumes light. For after being robbed of its own radiance, Necrozma became a being of endless hunger, a black hole searching for any spark to fill its emptiness. But before that fall, before the theft, the light of the Blinding One had already seeded something miraculous. In the deepest caves of Alola, bathed in the residual glow of that ancient visitor, a tiny creature began to form. It was nothing more than a spark at first, a fleck of stardust. But as the centuries passed, that spark grew into a soft, gelatinous being known as Cosmog. Cosmog was not a legendary in the traditional sense. It was a child of light, born directly from the Blinding One's generosity, and like a child, it had the potential to become something far greater. When Cosmog absorbed enough light, when it was ready, it would undergo a transformation. But here is the strange part. The transformation depended entirely on the environment. If Cosmog evolved under the rays of a full sun, it became Solgaleo, the beast that devours the sun. If it evolved beneath the radiance of a pale moon, it became Lunala, a creature that calls the moon. These two titans were not separate from the Blinding One. They were its descendants, its echoes. They carried its light within them, but they also inherited its burden. Solgaleo and Lunala became the guardians of the ultra wormholes, those dimensional tiers that connect Alola to the dark realm where Necrozma now wandered. The ancients understood this connection. They crafted two sacred instruments, the Sun Flute and the Moon Flute, from the bones of ancient Pokémon that had absorbed the Blinding One's light. When played in harmony, these flutes could open a wormhole, allowing passage between worlds. The notes themselves were said to mimic the heartbeat of the original light, a melody that called to the lost star. But the flutes were never meant to be used lightly. The wormholes they opened led directly to Necrozma's prison, a dimension of shattered crystals and perpetual twilight. The people of Alola knew that if they ever summoned the Blinding One back, it would come not as a giver of light, but as a taker. And so they hid the flutes, and they passed down the story as a warning. The light that had once blessed their islands had been stolen, and the thief had become a monster. Yet even in its darkened form, Necrozma still remembered what it had been. It still dreamed of the moment when it first bathed Alola in illumination, and somewhere deep within its hollow core, that memory waits. It waits for a time when the flutes are played again, when a new Cosmog is born, when someone brave enough to face the light and the darkness together steps forward, because the story of Alola is not just about a fallen star. It is about the price of taking without giving, and the hope that even a creature of pure hunger can one day be restored. And that is where our next chapter begins. For you see, the people of Alola did not rely solely on ancient beasts from other dimensions. They had their own guardians, 4 island deities who watched over the land and sea, the hills and the sky. Their story is one of protection, of sacrifice, and of a bond so deep that it shaped the very soul of the archipelago. It is a story that begins with a single question. What happens when the guardians of the islands must face a light that has gone dark? The answer, my friend, lies in chapter 16, Guardians of the Islands. The light that Necrozma had so freely given was taken, shattered, and scattered across the 4 islands of Alola. What remained of the Blinding One's radiant essence did not vanish. It seeped into the land, crystallized into shimmering stones that pulsed with a stolen power. The people of that age did not understand what they held, only that these crystals hummed with a strange and potent energy. They called them Z crystals, and they believed them to be gifts from the gods. In a way, they were right. But the gods who guarded those islands were not the one who had lost its light. Before Necrozma ever fell from the sky, before the first ultra wormhole tore open between dimensions, there were the Tapu, 4 deities, each bound to an island, each a guardian of a sacred trust. Tapu Koko of Melamele, crackling with electricity and mischief. Tapu Lele of Akala, whose scales shimmered with a healing glow that could soothe or destroy. Tapu Bulu of Ulaula, the verdant bringer of growth and decay. And Tapu Fini of Pony, whose mist could conceal truths and grant visions of what was lost. They were not creators, they were protectors. Their purpose was to defend the islands from any threat, whether it came from the sea, the sky, or from somewhere far stranger. And the strangest threats came through the ultra wormholes. When Necrozma's light was taken, it did not simply fade. The energy that had been torn from its body left a wound in the fabric of reality. That wound became a gateway, and through it came beings that did not belong in Alola, the Ultra Beasts. They were not necessarily malevolent, but they were alien. Their biology defied the laws of the natural world. They leaked poisons, drained life, and warped the environment around them simply by existing. The Tapu did not negotiate. They fought, and so began a series of battles that are remembered only in fragments. Oral traditions passed down among the kahunas, whispers of battles where the sky turned electric green and the sea boiled with phantom light. The Tapu drove back the invaders, but they did not erase the wounds. The ultra wormholes remained, and the Tapu became ever more vigilant, ever more suspicious of anything that came from beyond. But here is where the nature of these guardians becomes curious. They are not benevolent in the way a human might expect. The Tapu are fickle. They do not protect the people of Alola out of love or duty. They protect the islands themselves, and the people are simply part of that landscape. The Tapu demand respect. They demand trials. The island challenge, the grand tradition of Alola, is not merely a cultural ritual. It is a survival mechanism. The Tapu require the people to prove themselves worthy of living on sacred ground. They test the young, the brave, the foolish, and they punish those who fail. To be rejected by a Tapu is not simply a disappointment, it is a verdict. The gods have judged you unworthy of their protection. So why do they demand such trials? Because they remember. They remember a time when the people of Alola did not worship them, but sought to capture their power. When the ancient tribes tried to harness the energy of the crystals for war, the Tapu withdrew their favor. They learned that trust must be earned, and it can be revoked. The Island Challenge is a constant re-earning of that trust, a ceremony of humility that ensures the people never forget that the Tapu are not pets, not tools, but forces of nature with their own incomprehensible will, and the Z crystals themselves. They are the most tangible link between the people and the divine, but their origin is far more material than legend would have you believe. The Z crystals are not gifts from the Tapu. They are fragments of Necrozma's stolen light, crystallized by the earth over centuries. The Tapu cannot destroy these crystals. They are too saturated with the energy of another dimension, a power that predates even the birth of the islands. But the Tapu can use them. They can channel that light into their own attacks, which is why Z moves are possible only when a human and a Pokémon synchronize with the crystal's resonance. The Tapu allow this. They tolerate it, because they know the crystals are a remnant of a being that once gave Alola its first dawn, but they do not trust it, and they never will. The relationship between the Tapu and the people of Alola is not one of worship and grace. It is a tense ancient pact. The Tapu give protection in exchange for vigilance. They guard the islands from the ultra beasts that still drift through the cracks in reality. They test every generation to ensure that the humans remain humble, and they hold the memory of Necrozma's fall, a warning that light, even stolen light, can become a curse if it is not respected. But the story of Alola is only one chapter in a much larger pattern. Across the ocean, in a region that would one day be called Galar, another force was stirring. A meteor had fallen there thousands of years before, carrying a creature whose power would dwarf even the light of Necrozma. That creature would be called Eternatus, and its arrival would trigger the darkest day in Galar's history. From the volcanic shores of Alola, where the Tapu deities clashed with dimensional invaders, we now turn our gaze far across the ocean to the green and misty land of Galar, a region known today for its stadiums, its Pokémon battles, and its peculiar energy that causes Pokémon to grow to truly colossal size. But that power, that phenomenon called Dynamax, is not a natural gift. It is the lingering echo of a catastrophe so ancient, so profound, that its scars have shaped the very fabric of the land. And at the heart of that catastrophe lies a being that did not originate on this world. 20,000 years ago, the night sky above Galar was interrupted by a streak of light, unlike any other. A meteor, burning with an eerie crimson light, tore through the atmosphere and crashed into the heart of the region. The impact was devastating, sending shockwaves across the continent and carving a massive crater that would one day become the slumbering Weald. But the meteor itself was not a lifeless rock. Within it, encased in a shell of cosmic stone, slept an extraterrestrial entity, a creature of pure, concentrated energy, a being from beyond the stars, a predator of power. Its name, as it would later be discovered, was Eternatus. As the meteorite's casing cracked and dissolved over the centuries, Eternatus began to leak its essence into the surrounding environment. This essence, a strange and volatile energy, seeped into the soil, the water, and the very air of Galar. The people of that time, a primitive and scattered collection of tribes, had no understanding of what was happening. They witnessed strange lights dancing in the sky, earthquakes that shook the mountains, and most bewilderingly, their Pokémon companions began to grow. Not just grow, but swell to immense towering forms, their bodies bathed in red and purple auras. This was the first Dynamax phenomenon, a side effect of Galar particles, the name given to the leaked energy from Eternatus's dormant form. For millennia, the energy lay mostly dormant, a slow poison soaking into the land. But then Eternatus began to stir. It was not content to simply exist in a broken shell. It hungered. The creature, a draconic nightmare of skeletal wings and crystalline core, possessed an ability to absorb energy on a massive scale. Not just the energy of its environment, but the life force of every living thing around it. And so, the event that would become known as the Darkest Day began. Eternatus rose from its crater, a giant of crimson and violet, and it started to pull the very energy of the region into itself. The sky turned blood red, the ground trembled. Pokémon spontaneously began to Dynamax, not in controlled bursts, but in a chaotic, uncontrolled frenzy. The land itself seemed to scream. In this hour of absolute terror, two kings ruled over the scattered tribes of Galar. They were brothers, or perhaps allied lords, united by blood and duty. They saw their people falling, their Pokémon turning into berserk giants, and they knew that no ordinary weapon could stop the sky-fallen monster. But they were not alone. At their sides were two legendary Pokémon, two great wolves made of metal and stone, gleaming with an ancient power. These were the heroes of that forgotten age, Zacian and Zamazenta. The kings, using weapons forged from a mysterious metal found deep within the earth, were able to channel the power of these wolves. Together, the two kings and their canine companions faced Eternatus. The battle raged across the Galar countryside. Zacian, with its sword-like fang, could cut through the very energy Eternatus absorbed. Zamazenta, with its shield-like mane, could deflect the creature's devastating beams. But Eternatus was too powerful, too vast. The kings realized that they could not defeat it alone. They needed a weapon of their own, a tool to imprison the entity. And so they devised a cunning plan. Using the same ancient technology that had forged their swords and shields, they created a pair of powerful artifacts, the sword and the shield. In a final desperate gamble, the kings lured Eternatus into a trap. With Zacian and Zamazenta's help, they sealed the extraterrestrial entity within its own power, trapping it deep underground in a chamber beneath what would become the town of Hammerlock. The Darkest Day was over, but the Galar particles remained, forever a part of the land. History, as it often does, forgot the true details. The names of the two kings faded into legend. The heroic wolves, Zacian and Zamazenta, were remembered as the Sword and Shield Pokémon, but their true story, the story of their partnership with the ancient rulers, became a myth. a bedtime story. The people of Galar came to see the Dynamax energy as a gift, a tool for sport and spectacle, unaware that it was the residue of an apocalyptic event. They built their stadiums, they bred their Pokémon for battle, and they celebrated their champions, all while standing on the sleeping body of an ancient horror. But the legend of the Sword and Shield, those two mythical wolves, and the kings who wielded them, would one day be remembered again in a story that begins when a new champion rises to face the shadow of the past. And that story, the truth behind the legend, is waiting for us in the next chapter. The meteor that brought Eternatus crash-landed 20,000 years ago, spilling Galar particles across the land and awakening a corruption that turned ordinary Pokémon into raging giants. The darkest day was not a myth born from campfire tales. It was a catastrophe of cosmic origin, and the people of ancient Galar were helpless. But they were not alone. Two figures appeared on the battlefield, not as armoured knights or kings in crown and cape, but as something far older and more primal. They were Pokémon wreathed in legend, sword and a shield made flesh. The first carried a gleaming blade in its mouth, a weapon forged from the very light of the sky. The second bore an immense shield upon its head, impenetrable and unyielding. Together, they charged into the heart of the chaos, and they did not retreat. These were Zacian and Zamazenta, the true heroes of Galar's origin story. They are the ones history would later call the kings, though they never wore a crown. They faced Eternatus in a battle that shook the foundations of the world, their claws and fangs meeting the endless hunger of the extraterrestrial entity, and they won. They drove Eternatus into submission and sealed it away, ending the first darkest day. But the aftermath was not a celebration. The battle had taken everything from them. Wounded and exhausted, the two Pokémon staggered away from the site of their victory. They did not seek glory. They did not demand statues or songs. Instead, they retreated into the slumbering Weald, a dense, mist-choked forest where light barely penetrates and time seems to stand still. There they lay down and they slept. For thousands of years, they remained hidden, waiting for a call that might never come. Meanwhile, the royal family of Galar saw an opportunity. They could not allow the truth to survive, that the fate of the region had been decided not by human kings, but by wild Pokémon. So they rewrote the story. They painted themselves as the heroes, claiming that ancient monarchs had wielded the sword and the shield, that it was their courage and strength that had banished the darkness. The true identity of the kings was buried under layers of propaganda, legend, and convenient forgetting. The people believed what they were told, and the Pokémon who had saved them became nothing more than symbols on a crest, decorations on a castle wall. Centuries passed. The slumbering Weald grew quiet and eerie, a place locals avoided. The story of the darkest day faded into children's tales, a moral fable about bravery and unity. But the corruption did not die. Eternatus, though sealed, never vanished. Its influence lingered in the Galar particles that still pulsed beneath the ground, waiting for the right moment to surge again. And then in the modern day, the signs returned. Pokémon began to Dynamax uncontrollably, towering over cities, causing chaos. The darkest day was rising once more, and this time there were no ancient heroes to answer the call. Except there were. Deep in the slumbering Weald, something stirred. A pair of eyes opened in the darkness. A blade gleamed. A shield rose. Zacian and Zamazenta awakened, drawn by the same energy that had first brought them to battle so long ago. They would not let the world fall again. They would face Eternatus one more time, and this time they would not be forgotten. But Galar is a land of many legends, and the sword and shield are only part of its story. Before the darkest day, before the meteor fell, there was another king, one who did not fight, but who gave. A king whose power was not in battle, but in harvest. And that tale begins with a golden figure and a promise of endless plenty. After the darkest day ended, and the ancient heroes retreated into the slumbering Weald, Galar was left to rebuild. But before Zacian and Zamazenta ever rose to face Eternatus, Before the first stone of Hammerlock was laid, there was another ruler, a sovereign whose reign stretched back into the deepest roots of Galarian history. A king who did not wield a sword, but who commanded the very forces of life itself. This was Calyrex, the king of bountiful harvests. Calyrex was not a conqueror in the way we imagine kings. It did not command armies or raise castles. Its power was far more ancient and far more subtle. Calyrex could see what had been, what was, and what had not yet come to pass. Past, present, and future were not separate streams to this being. They were a single river, and Calyrex stood at its source, watching every ripple before it ever touched the shore. Legend says that in those days, Calyrex ruled over all of Galar, not through force but through grace. It blessed the land with abundant harvests. The soil was rich, the rains came when they were needed, and the people never knew hunger. The bond between Calyrex and its people was absolute, and in return for the bounty, they offered their faith. But a king is nothing without their court, and at Calyrex's side stood two loyal steeds, born of the same lineage, but as different as frost and shadow. Glastria the first was a creature of pure winter. Its body radiated a cold so deep that its very breath could freeze a river solid. Its hooves left trails of frost on the earth, and where it galloped, the air turned crisp and clear. The second steed, Spectria, was the opposite in every way but one. It was a creature of ghostly darkness, a being that moved without sound, leaving no trace, as if it were carved from the space between moments. Its mane flowed like black smoke, and its eyes held the deep quiet of a forgotten grave. Together, these two steeds shared a bond with Calyrex that was beyond master and mount. They were its partners, its protectors, its closest companions. When Calyrex rode Glastria, the cold brought stillness and preservation. When it rode Spectria, the shadows carried it through the edges of perception into the hidden folds of time. Yet as centuries passed, something began to change. The people of Galar grew distant. They forgot the old ways. They stopped offering their faith, stopped looking to the sky for Calyrex's blessing. Perhaps it was the rise of new technologies, or perhaps it was simply the slow erosion of belief that comes with the passage of ages. Either way, the loss of human faith caused Calyrex to weaken. Its crown, once a symbol of its royal power, dimmed. Its ability to see the future began to fade. The bond that had once sustained the land began to unravel. And without the energy of belief, Calyrex's influence shrank. The king retreated, not into a slumbering weald, but into a hidden corner of Galar, where it waited, patient and forgotten. And so the story of Calyrex became a myth, a whisper carried by farmers who noticed a good harvest and called it luck. The crown passed from living memory into legend. The two steeds were scattered, their bond with their king severed by time and neglect. But myths have a way of resurfacing when the world needs them most, because the harvest does not forget its king forever. In recent years, the restoration of the harvest myth began. Travelers who wandered into the deepest parts of the Crown Tundra discovered a strange plant, a carrot of impossible size, glowing with a faint ancient energy. When that carrot was offered, Calyrex returned, not as a fading ghost of a king, but as the true ruler of Galar, its crown restored by a single act of faith. It reunited with Glastria or Spectria, depending on the nature of the bond offered, and once again, the king of bountiful harvests walked the land. The cycle of plenty was reborn, and Galar remembered that before the swords and shields, before the darkest day, there was a sovereign who saw all of time, and who trusted its people enough to give them everything. But while one ancient mystery was revived in the frozen north, another was stirring far to the south. Deep beneath the crater of Paldea, a place called Area Zero held secrets that made even the oldest legends seem young. The paradox of that place was something the past, present and future could not easily explain, and soon we will descend into that abyss. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. Calyrex's reign over ancient Galar faded into myth, buried beneath centuries of new kingdoms and forgotten wars. But across the sea, in the region known as Paldea, another mystery was waiting to be unearthed. One that would challenge everything humans thought they understood about time, evolution, and the very fabric of reality itself. It began with a wound in the earth. The great crater of Paldea is not a mountain that formed from volcanic fire, nor a valley carved by ancient rivers. It is a near-perfect circular chasm, plunging miles into the planet's crust, as if something from beyond the sky had punched directly into the world's heart. For generations, the people of Paldea regarded the crater with a mixture of reverence and fear. Its walls were too steep to climb, the air too thin, the electromagnetic fields too erratic for any machine to function. And so it remained, a sealed door at the centre of the land, hiding whatever lay below. That changed in the late 1800s, when a scholar named Heath arrived in Paldea. Heath was a man driven by an obsession with the unknown, a pioneer who believed that the crater held answers to questions no one had yet thought to ask. He assembled an expedition team, geologists, biologists, mystics, and cartographers, and together they descended into the abyss. What they found was not a simple cave system or a dormant volcano. It was a world turned inside out. Heath's journals, later recovered and kept under lock and key by the Paldea League, describe a landscape where time itself seemed to lose its grip. In the deepest chambers of what they would eventually call Area Zero, the expedition stumbled upon creatures that defied every known classification. They saw Pokémon that looked like ancient ancestors of modern species, creatures that should have gone extinct millions of years ago, walking alongside beings that appeared to be from the distant future, their bodies shimmering with an energy that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. These were the Paradox Pokémon, and they were not illusions. They were real, flesh and blood Pokémon that existed in the same space, at the same moment, despite belonging to wildly different eras of evolutionary history. Heath named them with a mix of awe and confusion. The ancient forms he called Great Tusk and Screamtail, and the futuristic ones he called Iron Treads and Iron Bundle. He recorded every detail with the precision of a scientist, yet his final notes admit he could not explain how such a contradiction was possible. The key to the mystery lay in the crystal formations that lined the walls of Area Zero. These were not ordinary minerals. They pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, as if something alive were breathing within the stone. When touched, these crystals caused Pokémon to enter a state known as terrestrialization, their bodies encased in a brilliant, gem-like armor that amplified their power and sometimes changed their type entirely. Heath theorized that the crystals were tied to a single, hidden entity, a being he called the hidden treasure of Area Zero. That entity was Terrapagos, according to the fragments of lore Heath pieced together from ancient Paldean texts and the carvings found within the crater. Terrapagos was a primordial turtle-like Pokémon that had slumbered beneath the region for eons. Its shell was made of a substance that could warp space-time, and when it stirred, it released a unique energy, the source of the terrestrial phenomenon. In essence, Terrapagos was a creature that existed simultaneously in all timelines, a living paradox that held the fragments of past, present and future within its own body. The deeper Heath's team explored, the more the boundaries of reality began to blur. The Zero Lab, the underground facility built decades later to study the crater, became a place where time lost all meaning. Scientists reported seeing themselves from earlier that day, walking down the same corridor, or hearing echoes of conversations that had not yet happened. The Pokémon there did not age. They simply shifted between forms, as if the concept of a linear timeline was an illusion that only the surface world believed in. Some researchers whispered that Area Zero was not a natural phenomenon, but a scar left by an ancient battle between forces that mortals were never meant to understand. Others believed it was a window into the original state of the universe, where all moments coexisted before time was created. Whatever the truth, Heath's expedition ended abruptly when part of the crater collapsed, forcing the team to retreat. He spent the rest of his life writing a secret report, hoping that one day humanity would be ready to face what he had seen. But the paradox of Area Zero was not a story for the faint of heart. It raised questions that could shatter the foundation of every known myth and scientific principle. If past and future could exist in the same place, then what did that mean for the legendary Pokémon who were supposed to have created the world? Were Dialga and Palkia merely overseeing a small, protected bubble of reality, while the rest of time churned freely in the depths of Paldea? Or was Area Zero itself a prison, or perhaps a refuge, for a creature like Terrapagus that could not be allowed to wake fully? These are the kinds of mysteries that do not give answers easily. They linger, waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to descend again. And while Paldea sleeps above its hidden crater, there are other secrets buried beneath the earth, artifacts of ruin that whisper of a different kind of danger. One that has nothing to do with time and everything to do with greed. The treasures of ruin are waiting, and soon enough, someone will find them. The great crater of Paldea hides more than just Terrapagos and the source of the Terrastal phenomenon. For all the wonder beneath that chasm, the surface of the region itself carries scars of a different kind. Scars left not by geological forces or ancient Pokémon, but by the greed of a single human king. You see, before the scholars of the present day ever set foot in Area Zero, before the paradox Pokémon were even a whisper in Heath's journal, Paldea was ruled by a monarch whose hunger for power knew no limits, and that hunger gave birth to 4 of the most dangerous legendary Pokémon ever sealed away. It is a tale of ruin, of curses made flesh, and of the terrible price that comes when human malice finds a vessel. The story begins not with a creature, but with treasures. 4 treasures, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship, brought to Paldea from distant lands by that greedy king. He wanted them not for their beauty, but for the power they supposedly held. Legends spoke of artifacts that could command the elements, bend the will of others, and grant their owner dominion over the very forces of nature. But the king was blind to the truth. These were not simple vessels of power, they were prisons, and inside each one, the accumulated resentment, envy, and cruelty of countless generations had taken root. The king brought the treasures to his palace, displaying them as trophies of his ambition. He believed that by possessing them, he could claim their power for himself. Instead, he awakened something far older and darker than any human sorcery. The malice that had seeped into those objects over centuries began to stir. It fed on the king's own greed, on the jealousy of his court, on the suffering of those he had conquered, and soon that malice became self-aware. It took form, it became will. 4 beings emerged from those cursed treasures, and they were not mere Pokémon in the usual sense. They were manifestations of human malice, given shape by the negative emotions that had soaked into the artifacts over time. Their names are Warcheen, Xianpao, Tinglu, and Qiyu, and each one embodies a different facet of the corruption that created them. Woxin, the first of the 4, emerged from a set of wooden tablets that had been used to record the darkest secrets of a forgotten dynasty. The tablets themselves were inscribed with curses, oaths of vengeance, and the bitter confessions of tyrants. When the malice coalesced, it took the form of a snail-like creature, its shell made from those very tablets. Woxin is the embodiment of resentment that festers over time, the slow burn of grudges that never die. Its mere presence drains the life from the land around it, wilting plants and souring water, as if the earth itself remembers the hatred that birthed it. Then there is Qianpao, born from a sword that had been used to execute the innocent. The blade was said to have been forged from ice, mined from the highest peak, but it was tempered not by water, but by blood. Over centuries, the sorrow of its victims and the cruelty of its wielders fused together. When the malice awoke, it became a sleek white panther-like creature, its fangs and claws made of that same frozen steel. Qianpao does not simply attack its enemies. It freezes them solid, then shatters them with a single glance. It is the embodiment of a cold, calculated hatred, the kind of malice that hides behind a beautiful exterior, waiting for the moment to strike. Ting Lu, perhaps the most ancient of the four, came from a vessel known as a Dao, a ritual bronze bowl used in sacrifices long ago. The bowl was not for offerings of grain or incense. It was used to hold the ashes of those who had been burned alive as offerings to jealous gods. The ash itself was saturated with terror and agony, and from that ash, Ting Lu rose. It appears as a massive, deer-like creature, but its body is made of stone and earth, and it carries the weight of every life that was once poured into that vessel. Ting Lu's power is to command the land itself, causing earthquakes and landslides by simply moving. It embodies the crushing weight of accumulated suffering, the kind that grinds civilizations into dust. And finally, Chi Yu. This creature is the most deceptive of them all. It emerged from a set of beads, each one a bead of fire that had been used to mark the foreheads of those condemned to die in the king's arenas. The beads were soaked in the desperation and rage of the condemned, and when the malice ignited, it became a small, fish-like Pokémon with glowing eyes. But do not let its size fool you. Chi Yu carries a flame of pure malevolence that burns hotter than any natural fire. It can incinerate entire armies with a single burst of its power. Chi Yu is the embodiment of explosive anger, the kind that flares up in an instant and leaves nothing but ash. These four beings were not simply wild Pokémon. They were living curses, each one a direct response to the negative emotions that humanity had poured into the treasures. The greedy king, having awakened them, soon realized his mistake. He could not control them. The four treasures of ruin rampaged across Paldea, punishing the land for the sins of its people. Forests were set ablaze, mountains were toppled, rivers froze solid, and fields withered into dust. The king's own palace was destroyed, and he fled in terror. But the people of ancient Paldea were not without hope. Sages and mystics, who had long warned the king against dabbling in such dark artifacts, devised a plan to contain the four beings. They could not destroy them. After all, you cannot destroy malice itself. What they could do was seal each one inside a separate shrine, hidden in the most remote corners of the region. The shrines were built with special locks, designed to absorb the malice and keep it dormant, but the seals were not perfect. They required that the treasures that had birthed the beings be placed back inside the shrines. And even then, the negative energy would slowly seep out over millennia, and so, the four treasures of ruin were imprisoned. Wo-Chien was sealed within the Grasswither Shrine, deep in the forests of South Province. Chien-Pao was locked away in the Isorend Shrine, high in the freezing mountains of North Province. Ting Lu was confined to the Ground Blight Shrine, buried in the arid deserts of West Province, and Chi Yu was entombed in the Fire Scourge Shrine, hidden in the volcanic caves of East Province. Each shrine was built to withstand the elements, but more importantly, to withstand the malice. And there they have remained for centuries, waiting. The tale of these four artifacts brought to Paldea by a greedy king is a cautionary one. It shows us that negative human emotions are not just feelings. They have a power, a weight that can literally give birth to legendary entities. Wo-Chien, Chien-Pao, Ting Lu, and Chi Yu are not forces of nature like Groudon or Kyogre. They are forces of human nature, resentment, cruelty, suffering, and rage made manifest. They remind us that some legacies are not written in stone or gold, but in the darkness that lurks within every heart. Yet, even as the treasures of ruin slumber, other legends stir in the shadows of Paldea. There are stories of a hidden ogre, a creature of immense power that was betrayed by those it trusted, and of three loyal companions who may not have been so loyal after all. That is the tale of the hidden ogre and the loyal three. And it is a story that reveals how even noble intentions can twist into bitterness when jealousy takes root. But that is a chapter for another night, one that will plunge us deeper into the forgotten myths of this ancient land. Until then, let the ruins rest. We move now from the cursed treasures of Paldea those artifacts born of human greed and malice, to a place where the line between hero and villain was drawn not by truth, but by the storyteller's prejudice. The land of Kitakami, a quiet, rural region nestled away from the bustling cities of modern Pokémon society, holds a tale that has been passed down for generations. A tale of a fearsome ogre and 3 brave Pokémon who rose to protect the people. But like many legends told by the victors, this story hides a much darker, more heartbreaking truth beneath its surface. The folklore of Kitakami paints a clear picture. Ogerpon, the masked ogre, was a monstrous creature that terrorized the land. It is said that Ogerpon would descend upon the villagers, wreathed in flames and wielding immense power, leaving destruction in its wake. The people, terrified and helpless, needed saviors, and so 3 Pokémon answered the call. The loyal 3, Munkidori, a swift and clever Pokémon, Okidogi, a fierce and protective guardian, and Fezandipiti, a graceful and charming being. Together, they confronted the ogre and drove it away, sealing it in a cave deep in the mountains. They were hailed as heroes, and the people of Kitakami built shrines in their honor. The story ends with Ogerpon forever imprisoned, its masks scattered as trophies of victory. But if you listen closely to the whispers of the land, if you read between the lines of the oral tradition, a different narrative emerges. The truth, uncovered by those who dared to question the accepted canon, is that Ogerpon was never the aggressor. It was the victim, a victim of theft, of prejudice, and of a conspiracy orchestrated by the very beings celebrated as heroes. Ogerpon was a gentle creature, a guardian of nature who lived peacefully in the Kitakami region. It possessed 4 masks, each imbued with a unique elemental power: the Wellspring Mask, the Hearthflame Mask, the Cornerstone Mask, and the Teal Mask. These masks were not weapons of war. They were tools of harmony, allowing Ogerpon to nurture the land and protect the balance of life. But the loyal 3 coveted those masks. They were not loyal to the people of Kitakami. They were loyal only to their own greed. In a cruel betrayal, they stole Ogerpon's masks, leaving it vulnerable and enraged. Then they twisted the story, casting themselves as the saviors and Ogerpon as the monster. The people, seeing only the aftermath of the struggle and hearing the testimony of the attackers, accepted the lie, and so the legend of the evil ogre was born. The real key to understanding this perversion of history lies in an otherwise unremarkable item, the Pecha Berry. This sweet fruit is common throughout the Pokémon world, known for its ability to cure poisoning. But in Kitakami, the Pecha Berry played a far more insidious role. The loyal 3, it is said, became addicted to the berries. They consumed them obsessively, and the fruit had a toxic effect on their minds. The Pecha Berry did not heal them. It corrupted them. It amplified their selfishness and aggression, turning them into the very monsters they accused Ogerpon of being. The masks they stole were not just symbols of power. They were the only things that could soothe Ogerpon's pain, and in taking them, the loyal 3 ensured that Ogerpon would be forever misunderstood, forever feared, forever sealed away. Recontextualizing regional myths through the lens of historical bias reveals a sobering pattern. How many other legends have been rewritten by those in power? How many so-called heroes were nothing more than thieves and liars? The story of Kitakami is a microcosm of how folklore can be weaponized, how a society can be conditioned to hate an innocent soul simply because the storytellers held the pen. Ogerpon, trapped in its cave, remains a tragic figure, a victim whose only crime was existing in a world that chose to believe the loudest voices. And yet the masks remain. They are scattered across the land, hidden in shrines, and passed down as heirlooms. They wait, perhaps, for a moment when someone will look beyond the legend and see the truth. A truth that challenges everything we thought we knew about good and evil, about heroes and villains. In the end, the most dangerous monsters are not the ones with claws and fangs, but the ones who wear the mask of righteousness. From this tale of stolen masks and corrupted heroes, we turn to a different kind of legend. One that was not born from ancient folklore, but from the cold, calculated ambition of modern science. a story of creation without nature, of life forged in a laboratory. The Mirage Pokémon and the man-made legends are waiting, and their origins are perhaps the most unsettling of all. What happens when humanity decides to play God? The result is not a myth, but a weapon. That is a question we're about to answer. The story of Ogre and the Loyal Three reveals a painful truth about how legends can be twisted by those in power. The people of Kitakami believed the mask-wearing ogre was a monster, while the true villains wore the masks of heroes. It is a cautionary tale about perception and the stories we choose to believe. But what happens when humanity itself decides to step into the role of the creator? What happens when we stop being the interpreters of myth and begin forging our own gods? Across the Pokémon world, there is a long and troubling history of human attempts to replicate the power of the divine. Not content with merely studying legendary beings or worshipping them from afar, certain individuals and organizations have sought to capture that power, to manufacture it, to create their own living legends. This is not a modern phenomenon born from advanced technology alone. It began centuries ago with a gift for a princess. 500 years ago, a brilliant inventor crafted a Pokémon unlike any other. It was not born from an egg, nor did it emerge from a natural habitat. It was built from steel and soul, a mechanical marvel that could think and feel. Its name was Magearna, and it was created as a gift for a princess in the distant region of Kalos. The princess's name is lost to time, but the purpose of the gift is not. Magearna was designed to be a companion, a friend that would never grow old, never fall sick, never die. At its heart beats the soul heart, a device that can absorb the life energy of other Pokémon to sustain its own power. It is a machine that mimics life, and yet it possesses a genuine heart. For centuries, Magearna lay dormant, waiting for a chosen one to awaken it. When it finally stirred in the modern era, it bonded with a young trainer named Ether. But Magearna's creation raises a profound question. Can a manufactured being truly be considered a legendary? In the eyes of the world, it is a mythical Pokémon, a category reserved for the rarest and most mysterious of creatures. Yet it was built by human hands. It is proof that even 500 years ago, humanity already dreamed of making gods. But that dream took a darker turn in more recent times. The greatest disaster in modern history, the fall of the Ether Foundation, was partly born from that same ambition. You see, in the Alola region, a scientist named Faber worked on a secret project for the Ether Foundation president, Lusamine. The goal was not a gentle companion for a princess. It was a weapon, a Pokémon designed to be the ultimate countermeasure against the terrifying Ultra Beasts that pierce through the dimensional walls known as Ultra Wormholes. That project was called Type Null, and its story is one of the saddest in all of Pokémon lore. Type Null was not born. It was synthesized from the DNA of many different Pokémon, combined with a legendary creature called Arceus. The researchers used cells believed to be from Arceus itself, the original creator god, to forge this new being. The result was a chimera, a patchwork of stolen power. But there was a problem. The creature's strength was too great. Its rage was uncontrollable. To keep it from destroying everything around it, the scientists fitted a heavy, restraining mask over its face. That mask suppressed its wild energy, but it also sealed away its true potential. It was a cage on its head, a symbol of its imprisonment. Type Null was not considered a success. It was labelled a failed experiment, a prototype. But one scientist saw the creature not as a failure, but as a victim. That scientist was Gladion, the son of Lusamine, who had fled the Ether Foundation in disgust. He took one of the Type Null specimens with him and named it Silverly. And when the mask finally broke, Silverly transformed into a being of immense power, capable of changing its type to counter any opponent. It was no longer a mere copy of a legend. It had become something new, something that could stand against even the most powerful Ultra Beasts. Silverly is a beast killer, a living weapon designed for a single purpose. But it is also a creature that earned its freedom through the compassion of a boy who refused to see it as a tool. The ethical implications of these synthetic legendaries are staggering. In creating Majana, type, null and silverly, humanity has crossed a line that was once sacred. We have taken the raw essence of myth and bent it to our will. The beings we call legendary are not just powerful creatures. They are forces of nature, embodiments of concepts, and in some cases, the architects of reality itself. To replicate that power is to claim a kind of godhood for ourselves. But at what cost? Majana was a gift of love, yet its soul heart absorbed life to function. Type, null was a weapon of protection, yet it was born from suffering and restraint. Even the most benevolent synthetic legendaries carry a shadow of exploitation. They remind us that playing creator is not the same as being a creator. In the Pokémon world, the line between natural and artificial is blurring, and with each new manufactured myth, we must ask ourselves, are we creating new forms of life? Or are we just making new cages for the old power we could never truly control? And then there is another project, one that does not build from steel or chimera DNA, one that seeks to clone the very origin of all Pokémon. It is a project that began in a laboratory on a remote island, and it gave birth to a creature whose rage rivals that of any legendary, a creature that was born not to serve a princess, nor to kill a beast, but to prove that humanity could surpass the gods themselves. The name of that project is Mewtwo, and its story is the final, most haunting chapter in the history of man-made legends. We've just seen how human hands, guided by love and the desire to preserve something precious, could create a being like Morgana. That was 500 years ago, in a time of kingdoms and princesses, when technology was still woven with magic and clockwork. But what happens when that same impulse, the need to create, to replicate, to surpass, turns away from gentle intentions and towards something far more ambitious? What happens when humanity decides it can not only build life, but rewrite the blueprint of existence itself? That question leads us to a dense jungle in South America, to the region of Guyana, and to a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about the origins of life on this planet. It was the 1970s, or thereabouts, when a team of researchers, working for a company that would later become synonymous with Pokémon science, uncovered something buried deep within the rainforest. Not a fossil, not a ruin, but a living embryo. A tiny curled creature, barely the size of a human fist, its DNA shimmering with an impossible completeness. This was Mew, the rarest of all Pokémon, the one that legend said contained the genetic code of every species that had ever lived or would ever live. And here it was, not as a myth, but as a tangible breathing specimen. The team brought the embryo back to Cinnabar Island, a volcanic landmass off the coast of Kanto, where the company, Team Rocket, in its early scientific guise, had established a sprawling research facility. The Pokémon Mansion, they called it, though it was less a home and more a temple to the arrogance of progress. In its laboratories, under the watchful eye of a man named Dr. Fuji, the real work began. Dr. Fuji was a brilliant geneticist, obsessed with the limits of life and the possibility of transcending them. He had studied the old myths, the ancient Pokédex entries that spoke of Mew as the ancestor of all Pokémon, and he saw in that embryo the key to unlocking powers no natural creature had ever possessed. He wanted to clone Mew, to create a copy that would not only replicate its abilities, but improve upon them. He wanted to build a god. The experiments were relentless. For months, Dr. Fuji and his team worked in sterile white rooms, filled with humming machines and vats of nutrient fluid. They extracted DNA from the Mew embryo, spliced it, amplified it, and attempted to force it to grow, but the process was unstable. The cells would divide, form tissue, but then collapse into chaos. They tried again and again, each failure pushing Dr. Fuji deeper into a kind of desperate genius. He began to modify the genetic sequence, to insert synthetic strands that would stabilize the growth and, more importantly, enhance the psychic potential. Mew was already powerful. Its mind could bend light and space. But Dr. Fuji wanted something that could reshape reality itself. Finally, after months of trial and error, a viable embryo emerged. It was not a perfect copy of Mew. It was larger, more angular, with a muscular tail and a fierce, intelligent face. Its eyes, when they opened, glowed with a violet light that seemed to pierce through the walls of the laboratory. The scientists called it Mewtwo, a simple name for a complex creation. They had succeeded. They had given birth to the most powerful psychic Pokémon the world had ever known. But Mewtwo was not grateful. It did not understand why it had been made, or what purpose it was meant to serve. It could read the minds of its creators. And what it found there was not a sense of wonder or reverence. It saw ambition, fear, greed, and a cold clinical detachment. The scientists saw Mewtwo as a tool, a weapon, a trophy. And Mewtwo, with its vast intelligence and its emerging sense of self, felt only a profound, existential loneliness. It asked itself, why am I here? Am I even alive, or just a machine made of flesh? And if I am alive, why do I feel like a prisoner? The answer came in a burst of raw psychic energy. One night, as the scientists slept, Mewtwo broke free of its containment pod. It walked through the halls of the Pokémon mansion, its mind reaching out, feeling the fear of the researchers, the cries of the other Pokémon trapped in cages, the hum of the machinery that had created it. And in that moment, Mewtwo made a decision. It would not be a pawn. It would not be a project. It would be its own being, and it would erase every trace of the place that had tried to own it. The destruction of the Pokémon mansion was catastrophic. The building, once a symbol of scientific achievement, was torn apart from the inside. Walls shattered, equipment melted, and the ground shook as Mewtwo unleashed a psychic storm that left nothing but rubble and silence. The few survivors fled into the night, and Dr. Fuji was never the same again. The mansion became a ghost story, a cautionary tale, whispered by trainers and researchers alike. But Mewtwo did not stay to gloat. It vanished into the world, carrying with it the weight of its own creation. Mewtwo is in many ways the bridge between ancient biological lore and modern science. The old myths told of Mew, the ancestor of all life, a creature of pure potential. But Mewtwo is not a myth. It is a product of test tubes and gene sequences, of ambition and error. It embodies the tension between what nature intended and what humanity can force into being. It is a reminder that the line between creation and destruction is thinner than we think, and that sometimes when we try to make a god, we only succeed in making a monster that is all too aware of what it is. And that awareness, that existential crisis, is what makes Mewtwo so compelling. It is not just a legendary Pokémon. It is a consciousness grappling with the meaning of its own existence. It is the first Pokémon to fully understand that it was born from a laboratory, and it is trying to decide what that means. Some say Mewtwo now wanders alone, searching for a purpose, or perhaps for a true equal. Others believe it has hidden itself in a place where no one can find it, waiting for the day when it might finally understand why it was made. But the story of Mewtwo is only one thread in a much larger tapestry. The experiments on Cinnabar Island were not the first attempt to tamper with the fabric of reality, and they were certainly not the last. As we continue to explore the origins of these legendary beings, we will find that the boundaries between worlds are far more fragile than they appear. In fact, there is a specific event, a moment when the very structure of space and time was laid bare, that would later be known as the Delta episode. And in that episode, the true scale of the multiverse and the role of a certain sky-high Pokémon would come into focus, forever changing how we understand the relationship between our world and others. But that is a story for our next chapter. The creation of Mewtwo was a triumph of human ambition, but it was also a warning. The scientists of Cinnabar Island had reached into the very fabric of life and twisted it to their will, and the result was a being of unfathomable power and deep, aching loneliness. But what they did not know, what they could not have known, was that their work was merely a shadow of a far greater cosmic drama, unfolding high above the world, and across realities they could never touch. Mewtwo was a clone, a copy, a creature born from a single strand of ancient DNA. But out in the silent blackness of space, something else was being born. Not from a lab, but from a laser beam and a microbe. And its arrival would force humanity to confront a truth far stranger than any experiment. In the Hoenn region, a meteorite streaked across the sky, and when it crashed into the ocean, the world changed. That meteor carried a life form, a crystalline entity that seemed more like a virus than a creature, a cluster of organic data adrift in the void. But it was not alone. The meteor had been struck by a laser, a beam of immense energy that mutated the space virus, reshaping it into something conscious, something aggressive, something we now call Deoxys. This was no natural evolution. This was an accident of cosmic proportions, a birth born from the collision of technology and extraterrestrial biology. Deoxys arrived on Earth as a stranger, a puzzle with no context. And its presence triggered a chain of revelations that would crack open the very structure of reality. You see, the arrival of Deoxys was not just a crisis, it was a confirmation. The world of Pokémon had long been haunted by whispers of parallel timelines, of worlds that diverged like branches from a single tree. The device known as the Link Cable, the strange properties of the distortion world, even the tales of Celebi travelling through time, all hinted at a multiverse. But it was in Hoenn that the proof became undeniable. Scientists and historians studying the ancient records of the Draconid people found something astonishing. The Draconids, a reclusive tribe who worshipped Rayquaza as their protector, had spoken of a great calamity from the sky, a meteor large enough to destroy everything. They called it the Grand Meteor Delta, and they believed that their guardian Pokémon, the Sky High Pokémon, had once ascended to stop it. But here was the twist. The Draconid legends described an event that had already happened. And yet, in our timeline, the Grand Meteor had never struck. The reason, as the Delta episode of the Hoenn games reveals, is that the Rayquaza we know had already stopped it. But that act of salvation required accessing a power that existed only in a specific branch of reality. In one timeline, the meteor was destroyed, and Mega Evolution never became a widespread phenomenon. In another timeline, the meteor was not stopped, and Mega Evolution became the key to survival. The two realities coexisted, separated by a single critical moment. Mega Evolution exists in one universe. It does not exist in another, and the proof lies in the actions of Rayquaza itself. When Rayquaza ascended to face the Grand Meteor, it did not do so alone. It had to achieve a new form, a transformation that required the energy of meteorites and the bond with a human. This was not the simple evolution of a Pokémon. This was a breakthrough into a higher state, a Mega Evolution that allowed Rayquaza to tear through the asteroid and save the world. But that Mega Evolution was only possible because the timeline in which it occurred had already embraced the power of the Keystone. In the timeline where Mega Evolution did not exist, Rayquaza could not Mega Evolve, and the Grand Meteor would have ended everything. The very existence of the Hoenn region we know, where land and sea are stable, where Groudon and Kyogre slumber, is a testament to a single timeline's victory, a victory made possible by a bond between human and Pokémon that transcended the ordinary. The Draconid people understood this better than anyone. They had lived for generations in the shadow of the sky, guarding the secrets of the meteor and the rituals that could summon Rayquaza. They knew that their hero was not just a creature of myth, but a guardian who had seen across the boundaries of space and time. When they spoke of the great dragon, they spoke of a being that had already saved them in one world and was always ready to save them in another. And when Deoxys arrived, crashing into the ocean off the coast of Hoenn, the Draconids recognized the signs. The alien virus was a fragment of that same cosmic event, a piece of the Grand Meteor that had been mutated by a laser, and it carried within it the echo of the other timeline. In the end, the story of the Delta episode is not just about a meteor, it is about the fragility of existence. The multiverse is real. Parallel timelines branch and twist, and in some of them, Mega Evolution is a commonplace power, while in others, it remains a forgotten dream. Rayquaza's ascension to stop the Grand Meteor was the moment that defined which reality we call home, and the arrival of Deoxys was the herald that confirmed it. The sky above Hoenn had always held secrets, but now we knew that the sky itself was a door to worlds that might have been, that could have been, that still are somewhere. And if the sky is a door, what lies beneath the waves? What temple waits in the deepest trench, guarded by a prince of the sea? That is a story for another night. From the confirmation of parallel universes, where mega evolution exists in one reality and is absent in another, and from the arrival of Deoxys as a cosmic virus mutated by a laser, we now dive into a different kind of mystery, one that does not speak of alternate dimensions or alien encounters, but of the deep ancient bond between humanity and the sea, a bond so profound that it gave rise to a nomadic people, the people of the water, and a mythical Pokémon who still rules the ocean currents. The people of the water are not like other civilizations of the Pokémon world. They have no fixed homeland, no stone temples on solid ground. Instead, they drift. Their entire existence is woven into the rhythm of the tides. For generations, they have sailed the vast blue expanse, living on ships and floating settlements, following the migration patterns of sea Pokémon and the whispers of the ocean itself. They are a culture of sailors, divers, and whisperers of the deep. Their legends claim that they were once blessed by a being of pure light that emerged from a seashell. A being that taught them to harmonize with the ocean's pulse. That being is Manaphy. Manaphy is often called the Sea Prince, but that title barely captures its true role. Manaphy is not just a powerful water type. It is a mythical Pokémon that acts as the living heart of the ocean's ecosystem. It has the ability to bond with any Pokémon, but more importantly, its very presence seems to sustain the balance of marine life. According to the oldest tales of the people of the water, Manaphy is the ruler of the sea, and all ocean-dwelling creatures recognize its authority. Unlike many legendary Pokémon who watch from afar, Manaphy interacts directly with those who prove themselves worthy. It is said to appear only to those who understand the ocean, not as a resource, but as a living partner. But Manaphy does not rule alone. It shares its domain with another curious species, Phione. Phione are smaller, more numerous, and can be born from the mating of Manaphy with a Ditto, yet they never evolve into Manaphy themselves. They exist as a kind of aquatic offspring, a living presence that carries a fraction of the Sea Prince's essence. The people of the water regard Phione as messengers of Manaphy, small emissaries that appear when the ocean is in harmony. They are the ripples that announce the coming of the wave. At the center of this ancient maritime faith stands a structure that is as restless as the sea itself, the Samia Temple. Unlike any other place of worship, Samia Temple is not built upon a mountain or hidden within a forest. It drifts. Yes, this temple moves through the ocean, sometimes submerged, sometimes surfacing, its stone walls covered in coral and barnacles. It is a sanctuary, but not for humans. The Samia Temple exists as a refuge for all sea life. Inside its halls, the currents flow gently, and the Pokémon of the deep gather to rest, heal, or give birth. It is a place of peace in a world where even the ocean can be harsh. The people of the water believe that the temple is guided by Manaphy's will, that it appears wherever the sea's balance is threatened. The bond between humans and the ocean is not just a metaphor in this lore, it is a living tradition. The people of the water pass down songs and navigational chants that describe the migration routes of Wailord, the nesting grounds of Corsola, and the hidden currents that lead to Manaphy's court. They do not build cities, they build ships. They do not claim land, they claim the horizon. And in return, the ocean provides. The Sea Prince watches over them. When a child is born into the people of the water, a ceremony is performed where they are taken to meet the sea for the first time. If a Phione appears nearby, it is considered a blessing, a sign that Manaphy has accepted the child. Yet there is a melancholy woven into this story. The people of the water are nomadic, but they are also disappearing. In the modern era of Sinnoh and beyond, their traditions are fading. Docks replace driftwood villages. Sailors become trainers. The old songs are sung less and less, and Samia Temple, once a fixture of their yearly pilgrimage, now drifts unvisited for long stretches. Manaphy still lives, still guides the ocean's rhythms, but its human partners are fewer. The temple waits. This is the quiet tragedy of the Sea Prince. Manaphy embodies the ocean's vastness, its depth, its mystery, but like the ocean itself, the connection to humanity is fragile, easily forgotten when we turn our backs to the shore. The people of the water remind us that some bonds are not written in contracts, but in the salt on our skin and the wind in our sails. And as the last of their elders tell the young ones about the prince who dwells in the deepest trench, they know that if the story is ever lost, the sea will mourn alone. And now, as we consider the fragile threads that tie myth to reality, we must look toward a different kind of convergence, where the sea meets the sky, where the ancient meets the new, and where all these origins, all these forces, might finally come together into a single, ultimate truth. The nomadic people of the water understood something that the rest of the world had long forgotten. Their connection to Manaphy and Fione was not merely a tradition or a folk tale. It was a living memory of a time when the boundaries between the divine and the mortal were thinner, when the sea itself breathed with the pulse of a great power that had no name. Samia Temple drifted not because it was lost, but because it was waiting for the one who would remember the old songs, who would understand that the ocean does not exist apart from the land, nor the sky apart from the sea. And as we follow that thread, we begin to see the pattern that binds every legend, every myth, every whispered story of a godlike Pokémon into a single ancient tapestry. Because here is the truth that the myths of every region, from Sinnoh to Paldea, from Yoto to Alola, all point back to the same cosmic origins. They may dress themselves in local colours and speak in the tongues of different peoples, but the skeleton beneath the skin is identical. Arceus, the first being, emerged from an egg that formed in the void, and from that single point, everything else was born. Time, space, antimatter, the fabric of reality itself, was woven by Dialga and Palkia, while Giratina was cast into a dimension of its own making, a shadow that could not be allowed to touch the light. Then came the Lake Trio, Uxie, Mesprit and Azulf, not as afterthoughts but as the guardians of the very qualities that make existence meaningful: knowledge, emotion, willpower. Without them, even time and space would be but empty containers. And you see this same progression echoed in every regional mythos. In Hoenn, Groudon and Kyogre represent the primal forces of land and sea, locked in a conflict that shapes the continents themselves. Their battle is not just about territory. It is about the balance between expansion and preservation, between solid ground and endless depth. And when that balance tips too far, Rayquaza descends from the ozone layer, a living mediator who does not take sides but restores the equilibrium. In Unova, the Tao trio carries the same weight, only now the conflict is not elemental but ideological, truth versus ideals. Reshiram and Zekrom were once one being, the original dragon, until two brothers could not agree on whether the world should be guided by what is real or by what could be. Their disagreement split a god in half, and Kyurem became the empty shell of what was lost, a frozen reminder that even the most powerful forces are vulnerable to the fractures of human conviction. And then there is Kalos, where the ancient war 3,000 years ago forced Xerneas and Yveltal into the role of life and death. Aziz's ultimate weapon was a human attempt to command the cycle of existence, and it nearly succeeded in breaking it forever. But even the most devastating human action could not erase the fundamental truth. Life and death are not enemies, they are partners. Xerneas gives, Yveltal takes, and together they maintain the rhythm that allows everything else to exist. The same is true of Solgaleo and Lunala in Alola, the sun and the moon, the light and the darkness perpetually chasing each other across the sky. And in Galar, Eternatus arrived from beyond the stars, a force of endless energy that could not be controlled, only contained. Zacian and Zamazenta did not destroy it, they sealed it. Because even a catastrophe can become part of a larger order if the balance is restored. So the question becomes, who mediates these divine conflicts? In every story, from the earliest myths to the most recent, there is a role for the chosen one, the player, you, not as a passive observer, but as the one who walks into the heart of the storm, who holds the key, who speaks to the gods not as a supplicant, but as an equal. In Sinnoh, you enter the Hall of Origin. In Hoenn, you awaken the Titans and climb the Sky Pillar. In Unova, you prove your worth by balancing truth and ideals within your own heart. In Kalos, you stand before the ultimate weapon and choose whether to revive or to let die. In every case, the legendary Pokémon do not act on their own. They respond to you. They recognize in you the same spark that moved Arceus to create the universe in the first place. The will to shape reality, the ability to choose. You are not just a trainer. You are the living embodiment of the balance that the gods themselves rely on. But if that is true, if the player is so central to these cosmic events, then why do legendary Pokémon choose to remain in the shadows of the modern world? Why do they not walk openly among humans, as they once did in the Age of Myth? The answer lies in the very nature of their power. A being that controls time cannot participate in the ordinary flow of days without distorting it. A being that embodies death cannot walk among the living without drawing the boundary between life and mortality too close. The legendary Pokémon withdrew not out of fear, but out of necessity. They are the pillars of reality, and pillars do not move. They stand at the edges of existence, holding up the framework so that the rest of us can live our small, precious lives without being crushed by the weight of infinity. They allow us to forget that the world is fragile, that the sky could fall, that the sea could rise, that every moment is a gift balanced on a knife's edge, and yet they never truly leave. They watch, they wait, and when the balance tips too far, when the old songs become too faint for the world to hear, they send a sign, a feather, a shard of ice, a whisper in the dark, and someone, somewhere hears it. That someone picks up a Pokéball and begins a journey that will end at the edge of the universe, standing before a being of pure light or shadow, and saying the words that have been spoken since the beginning. I am here, I am ready, I will carry the balance forward. This is the ultimate convergence. Every myth, every legend, every story of creation and destruction, every battle between land and sea, truth and ideals, life and death, is one story, and the player is the single thread that runs through all of them. You have always been the chosen one, not because you were destined, but because you chose to walk that path, and the future of the Mythos, whatever new region or era the games take us to, will be no different. The gods will still be waiting, the balance will still need a keeper, and the journey will still belong to you. And so all these threads converge into a single tapestry. Every creation myth, every cosmic battle, every ancient war, they all point back to one truth. The Pokémon world is built on cycles. Order from chaos, life from death, light from darkness. And yet, even after mapping the origin of time itself, there remain two great unanswered questions, two shadows cast by the light of Arceus. The first is the mystery of the original dragon of Unova. We know that a single powerful dragon once existed, and that it was torn apart by a human disagreement over truth and ideals. That fracture gave us Reshiram and Zekrom, and later the third piece, Kyurem. But what was the original dragon before it shattered? Was it the fusion of the three, or was it something greater, something that chose to divide itself to teach humanity a lesson? The games have never shown us that unified form. We have seen Kyurem absorb Reshiram or Zekrom, creating White Kyurem and Black Kyurem, but never the true original. That dragon remains a ghost in the mythos, a being whose full nature is still locked in the Unovan legends. Until it whole, the story is not complete. The second question is even more profound. We know Arceus emerged from an egg in the void and created Dialga, Palkia and Giratina. But what is Arceus? The Pokédex calls it the original one, the being that shaped the universe. Yet we have seen it in battle, We have caught it in a Pokeball. Are we truly capturing the creator of reality, or merely one of its avatars? The myth of Arceus in the Hall of Origin suggests that it exists beyond our dimension, that the Arceus we meet is only a projection, a vessel, and then there are the plates, each inscribed with a type, each a fragment of its power. Why would a supreme being need multiple pieces? Perhaps Arceus is not a single entity but a collective of all types, a being that is both one and many. The true form of Arceus remains hidden, perhaps even from the lore we have gathered, but the discovery of new regions continues to add layers to this ancient cosmology. When we journeyed to Alola, we learned of the guardian deities Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu and Tapu Fini, powerful protectors tied to the island's nature. And then we discovered Necrozma, a being of pure light from ultraspace, whose story expanded the mythos beyond one universe. Necrozma's arrival from another dimension suggested that the Pokémon cosmos is a multiverse, that Arceus may not be the only creator. In Galar we found Eternatus, an alien entity that fell to Earth on a meteor, its power triggering the Dynamax phenomenon. That story shifted the narrative. Not all legendary origins are divine. Some are cosmic accidents or invasions. And then Paldea gave us Area Zero, a crater where time itself seems fractured, where paradox Pokémon from past and future coexist. Heath's expedition there uncovered a hidden history, hinting that the Pokémon world's history is still being written, that new legends are waiting to be unearthed. This pattern reveals the cyclical nature of Pokémon history. Again and again, the same arc: creation, catastrophe, and rebirth. Arceus creates the universe, but Giratina is cast out. Groudon and Kyogre shape the land and sea, but their conflict nearly destroys the world until Rayquaza intervenes. The original dragon splits, leading to centuries of war, but eventually Reshiram and Zekrom are sealed away, waiting for a new hero. In Kalos, the ultimate weapon brought devastation 3,000 years ago, yet from that ash came Xerneas and Yveltal, forces that restore life and take it away in equal measure. The burned tower burned to the ground, but Ho-Oh resurrected 3 Pokémon as the legendary beasts. Every legend is a story of destruction that leads to transformation. The world is endlessly breaking and mending itself, and this cycle is why these legends endure in the hearts of trainers. They are not just stories, they are mirrors. They reflect the human experience of loss and renewal, of truth and ideals, of chaos and order. When we catch a legendary Pokémon, we are not just adding a powerful creature to our team. We are connecting to that cycle. We become part of the myth. The legend lives on because we carry it forward. Every new game, every new region, every new expedition into ancient ruins or deep caves adds another verse to the song. The future of the mythos is not a sealed book. It is an open sky. There will always be unanswered questions. There will always be a new legend to discover, a new mystery hinted at in a cave painting or a Pokédex entry. And as long as we keep exploring, as long as we keep wondering, the legend will never truly end. It will simply begin again. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.